Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 is here, and once again, Groot has stolen the show, this time as a pint-sized sapling of his former self. After the first film, it's easy to assume you might know everything there is to know about this talking tree, but Groot's roots run deep, and there are more than a few buried secrets fans might not know about Groot and his many forms. I speak for the trees. Vin Diesel, the voice of Groot, is getting a nice payday just to say the same 3 words over and over.
I am Groot.
But the part of the skill involved is saying those 3 words with emotion.
I am Groot.
One of the film's running themes is that Groot is actually having a complex conversation with those who can understand him, like Rocket. So where does that leave Diesel?
I am Groot.
He's confirmed that he actually works from a secret script with real dialogue, which means everything that Groot utters actually has a very literal meaning behind it. You just need to be Diesel, writer-director James Gunn, or a space raccoon in order to figure it out. And while Vin Diesel has built a career out of playing badasses, it caught some by surprise when he played the voice of a CGI tree, and later, the even higher voice of a tinier version of that tree. Even more surprising, Baby Groot's voice is almost completely Diesel with very little voice modulation.
I am Groot.
In an interview with Entertainment Tonight, Diesel revealed that he'd been practicing copying the voices of cartoon characters from a very young age. Diesel just happens to be right at home doing silly voices on command, so he had no trouble voicing Baby Groot naturally. Say what? Groot is mostly known for his 3 magic words. I am Groot. But during his early comic appearances, Groot was much more talkative, so what happened? According to one possible theory presented by Marvel, Groot's race all have a weirdly specific condition. Their larynx hardens as they get older, leaving them only capable of emitting a handful of words. While Baby Groot retains his tiny vocal vocabulary in the sequel, comics lore says that he might have been able to say a lot more. He's a real-life hero. While it wasn't the original intent behind Groot, he's a pretty logical mascot for ecological causes. The guy's a freaking tree after all, so it turns out Disney agrees. Under Disney's guidance, YouTuber D-Trix created a dance move inspired by a dancing Baby Groot toy. For each Marvel fan who used the hashtag GrootDanceBomb between April 18th and May 5th, or simply liked or shared the original video, Disney donated $1 to the Nature Conservancy up to $250,000. Baby Groot didn't just help save the galaxy, his dance moves are helping save planet Earth too. New twist on old roots. As a twig-sized tot, Baby Groot's personality has changed from his first film appearance. He's now a baby in more than just name. The movie implies that his intelligence and personality revolve around his relative age, something which is made explicit with Groot's appearance as a surly teenager during a mid-credits scene. However, this idea of Groot's changing personality isn't from the comics, where he's had to regrow a number of times. As far as comics are concerned, Groot can grow back from even a tiny sliver, and when he does, he still has all of his adult Groot's memories. So he doesn't go through any prolonged relearning phase, and even if he did, it would probably be moot. The Groot of the comics usually grows much faster than movie Groot, who's taken a bit of time to go from potted plant to toddler tree. Roots of aggression. One of the interesting side effects of Groot being regrown is that the younger version seems more aggressive than his former elder self. Sure, Groot could fight when he had to, but Baby Groot takes to battle with zeal. But is it really that much of a surprise? In his earliest comics appearances, Groot was a different kind of monster, tall, broad, articulate, and evil. He tried to take over Earth, and he posed just as much of a threat as any Marvel villain, but as he got older, he mellowed out and became a hero. Baby Groot's unexpectedly violent mood swings may be just because he's in his tree equivalent of the Terrible Twos, but they also could be from James Gunn channeling Groot's pulpy origins. Whatever the reason, the tiny tree practically stole the show, and in a movie with this many weirdos, that's saying something.
Oh, wow. I know. It almost hit me.
There's no supervillain quite like Thanos, the Mad Titan. He's been a menace to the Marvel Universe since 1973 when he made his debut in Iron Man number 55, and few villains have proven as formidable. Despite his long history in Marvel Comics, Thanos has never been as high profile as he is now. You probably already know that he's a nihilist cosmic warlord who's set on assembling the Infinity Gauntlet, allowing him to wipe out life as we know it. Set that aside though, and you'll find a ton of fascinating components to the character that are slightly lesser known. This is the untold truth of Thanos.
Tell me his name again.
Aesthetic inspiration. Thanos is far from the most unique creation in the history of comics. Created by writer and artist Jim Starlin, Thanos shares many similarities with characters created by another comics luminary, Jack Kirby, specifically Kirby's work on DC's New Gods series. Starlin initially based Thanos on the New Gods character Metron, a genius celestial observer to the events of the DC universe. Many have thought Thanos' inspiration to be the DC character Darkseid, but according to Starlin, that wasn't initially the case. Speaking in a 1998 interview with comic book artist, Starlin said, "You'd think that Thanos was inspired by Darkseid, but that was not the case when I showed up. In my first Thanos drawings, if he looked like anybody, it was Metron. Roy took one look at the guy in the Metron-like chair and said, 'Beef him up. If you're gonna steal one of the New Gods, at least rip off Darkseid, the really good one.'" Fortunately, the resemblance is only skin deep. The two characters have vastly different motivations and levels of empathy, and Thanos has fleetingly fought alongside heroes before. We think it's safe to say that's not really Darkseid's style.
I grant you a quick death.
My name is... This may come as a shock from the looks of him, but Thanos descends from a race of aliens that actually look more or less human. Thanos is a carrier of the deviant gene, sort of the equivalent of a mutant in his race. His mother, father, and the rest of his family are members of a superpowered alien race called the Eternals, living on Titan, one of Saturn's moons. They look human, and when his mother Suisan became pregnant, they expected him to look the same. When Thanos was born, however, one look at him sent all expectations out the window, including the name his mother intended to give him. Before she realized Thanos was a deviant, his mother intended to name him Dion. However, when her child was born, she was horrified by his mutation, and upon looking into his eyes, she realized he was the harbinger of the universe's ultimate destruction.
I made a huge mistake.
There's a lot more messing up this mother-son relationship than just unfulfilled expectations and a gross chin. Suisan tried to execute Thanos as a child, and Thanos successfully returned the favor later in life. Their complex, tumultuous relationship began with a simple name change.
The shorthand is the butterfly effect. A butterfly can flap its wings and be king, and in Central Park you get rain instead of sunshine.
Collecting the gems. The Marvel Cinematic Universe spent more than 10 years building up Thanos' search for the powerful 6 Infinity Stones, or gems as they used to be known, but it only took him 2 comic books to accomplish a goal that's taken a decade to get done on screen, with the Mad Titan snatching up the gems one by one in a 1990 comic called The Thanos Quest. The 2-part story saw Thanos traveling the universe and liberating the 6 gems from their owners, and they were all in very different hands compared to their cinematic counterparts. First, Thanos attacked the imprisoned In-Betweener, stealing the green Soul Gem from his head. Next, he liberated the Red Power Gem from the Champion in a physical contest, and stole the Time Gem from the Gardener, an ageless elder of the universe. The Yellow Reality Gem he pilfered from the Collector, who you may remember from Guardians of the Galaxy. The Purple Space Gem was taken from the Runner, and the Blue Mind Gem was nabbed from the Grand Master. Yes, that Grand Master from Thor Ragnarok. All of these foes fell with a surprising quickness when challenged, clearing the way for Thanos to assume the powers of a god in the Titanic 1991 event series The Infinity Gauntlet. Courting death. Many of Thanos' stories chronicle the Titan's obsessive passion for the living personification of death. It's a relationship that was foreshadowed by his very name. Jim Starlin originally came up with the character of Thanos while taking a college psychology class. He based Thanos' personality off of the Freudian concept of the death drive. In other words, the psychological impulse to end one's own existence. His name is reminiscent of Thanatos, the Greek mythological figure who is said to represent death. In Marvel Comics canon, Death is an actual person, a skeletal female entity who is sometimes referred to as Lady or Mistress Death. While Thanos is completely in love with her, Death often refuses to entertain his advances, or even acknowledge his existence, leading Thanos to lash out and seek attention through his universe-destroying scheme. While Death does eventually entertain a romance with Thanos, to say it's complicated would be putting it lightly. It certainly wasn't worth all of the destruction. In the end, Thanos' battle against the universe's strongest heroes was all done for the sake of impressing a girl. She's not even all that good-looking. My own worst enemy. All of Thanos' bluster covers up a lot of insecurity. As both the Infinity Gauntlet and the character's solo outings have shown, Thanos is surprisingly something of a self-defeating sad sack. On the surface, his goals would seem to be the same as any other supervillain: world domination and destruction. However, Thanos' motivations transcend typical villainy. He believes in oblivion like a religion and all but worships death itself. In his own twisted way, he believes he's doing the right thing. The universe is unworthy of existence, therefore it falls on him to give it what it deserves. The nihilism doesn't stop with his view towards all other life. It applies to him as well. Not even Thanos is worthy. This is why Thanos, despite his power, never manages to stay on top for too long. It's firmly established in Infinity Gauntlet that he ultimately fails because he allows himself to. He will always subconsciously leave a hole in his plans that the heroes can exploit to bring about his defeat. As much as he believes that the universe deserves to die, he doesn't believe himself worthy of the task at hand. For such a formidable, otherworldly figure, that's a pretty human flaw. Thanoside. Amalgam Comics is a pretty interesting corner of comics lore. A joint venture between Marvel and DC, it featured characters that were, you guessed it, amalgamations of Marvel and DC characters. The world of Amalgam is populated by heroes like Bruce Wayne, Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D., and Dr. Strange-Fade, and it didn't stop with heroes. The universe also featured amalgamations of villains from both publishers, and you can probably guess who Thanos was paired with. Thanos and Darkseid combined to form Thanoside. Like Darkseid, Thanoside rules the planet of Apocalypse, and like Thanos, he has an ambition to wipe out the universe. In the events that led to their combining in the Amalgam universe, Darkseid actually insulted Thanos, calling Thanos just a pale imitation of him, a funny nod to Thanos' origins. Amalgam's comics weren't exactly classics, but they were a whole lot of fun. Kicking it with the boys. One might reasonably assume the Marvel Universe only had room for one nihilistic Death Titan. That would be incorrect. One of the more interesting corners of Thanos' history involves a personal army of clones he made of himself. These clones are known as the Thanoside, and are formed by Thanos splicing his DNA with that of other Marvel heroes and villains. There's Omega, a cross between Thanos and Galactus, for instance. Thanos creates the Thanoside to test the abilities of enemies and allies alike. Eventually, he considers them failures and abandons them. Shockingly, the Thanoside don't take this portrayal particularly well. They band together and, being an army of Thanos clones, attempt to bring about the ultimate end of the universe. Luckily, they fail. Given Thanos' general tendencies, an army of Thanos clones ending up trying to destroy the universe isn't any kind of surprise. My Brother the Lover. No matter how many times he impressively destroys the universe or allies himself with the good guys, Thanos will never be as loved as his brother Star Fox. No, not that Star Fox. The Star Fox of the Marvel Universe, also called Eros, is a carefree, easygoing flirt. His charming personality is only amplified by his superpowers, which include a sort of pheromone effect. He can make people within 25 feet of him feel joy, effectively drawing them to him. When cranked up, it can provoke romantic feelings. He's basically a sentient Marvin Gaye record, which is pretty tough to compete with when you're a lumpy purple Death Titan. Star Fox couldn't be any more different from his brother Thanos, and that's probably a good thing. Can you imagine if those parents had to put up with not just one, but two lousy kids?
Avengers Endgame brought plenty of changes to the Earth's mightiest heroes, and one of the biggest was to Thor, who put on a lot of weight. Fat Thor, as he's being called, is dealing with a lot of depression and trauma. Here's his story. From Black Panther's anger after his father's murder to Iron Man's post-Avengers panic attacks to Valkyrie abandoning Asgard and drowning her sorrows, the Marvel movies have often dealt with the psychological trauma that comes with the life of a superhero. This time, though, it's on a completely different scale. In the MCU, the ending of Infinity War is unquestionably the biggest tragedy in the history of the planet. It's not just the billions of people turned to dust, but as we see in Endgame, it's all life, meaning that Thanos took out animals too. It's devastating for the entire universe, and the heroes who are at the center of it are no exception. When the film shifts its focus to 5 years after the snap, we see that each of the Avengers has been dealing with the trauma in a different way. Even before we get to Thor, it's not always healthy. In what's probably the most productive response, we see Captain America leading a support group for survivors, which works on a lot of levels. It highlights the empathy and moral center that makes Steve Rogers such an appealing character, and works as a tribute to his fallen friend, Sam Wilson. Before he was an Avenger, Sam was leading a support group for veterans, and with him gone, Cap is doing his best to carry on that legacy. The others, however, aren't doing so well in the way they deal with tragedy. Hawkeye goes to an incredibly violent extreme, trying to personally enforce a fairness that's absent in the loss of innocent life. Black Widow loses herself in obsessing over her work, trying to fix everything she can. While Tony Stark's life post-snap is far more idyllic than the other heroes, he's still completely given up making the world a better, safer place, which defined his life as Iron Man. He's refusing to use his genius to help others because, well, what's the point? He tried, it didn't work, time to move on. These are all very different and very relatable ways of dealing with a traumatic experience. Bruce Banner's reaction to the snap is worth paying close attention to, both because it represents the biggest change for one of the characters and because of the relationship he's had with Thor throughout the history of the MCU. Since they first slugged it out on the helicarrier back in the first Avengers film, they've been competitors, and the buddy comedy of Thor Ragnarok put them in direct contrast with each other. It's come up several times throughout the films that since they hadn't met Captain Marvel yet, they both consider themselves to be the strongest Avenger.
Welcome, strongest Avenger.
What?
For all their similarities, it's how they react to their failures that shows how different they really are. Since his character is entirely built around making explosive anger and the reaction to trauma a literal, physical change, it makes sense that it's the Hulk that we first see reacting to the devastation that comes along with Thanos. This unstoppable force of nature comes up against something he can't beat through strength. In Infinity War, Hulk learns the same thing Thor learns at the beginning of Endgame. Sometimes physical strength is completely meaningless, and that's a devastating lesson for someone who relies on that strength as one of their defining characteristics. For the Hulk, the initial reaction is another one of those unhealthy coping tactics. He runs away and hides. He won't even Hulk out when his life's in danger, leaving Bruce Banner free of his dark side for the first time in years. Instead of accepting this thing he's wanted, Banner comes to understand that the Hulk is a part of him, and as a result, he spends the 5-year gap essentially going through the gamma-powered superheroic version of therapy and working through his issues to unify his personalities.
18 months in the gamma lab. I put the brains and the brawn together. And now look at me. Best of both worlds.
Back in the first Avengers film, Bruce Banner gave us the iconic line that summed up his struggle with his emotions.
I'm always angry.
The Hulk we have in Endgame, however, is no longer driven by anger. He has young fans that want to take pictures with him, and he shares his lunch with Ant-Man in a scene that's far more than just a punchline. This is a brand new version of the Hulk, one who's not just smart, but kind and generous instead of being a mindlessly angry, walking temper tantrum with the potential to destroy a city. For the first time in the franchise, Bruce Banner is happy because he's learned and worked to change himself. Unfortunately, that's one thing Thor can't do. In a lot of modern stories about mythological characters, including recent comics about Thor, the idea is that the gods are the embodiments of ideas. Unlike humans, they can't change their nature.
Loki, I thought the world of you. I thought we were going to fight side by side forever, but at the end of the day, you're you and I'm me.
Thor is the god of thunder, who storms in with a bolt of lightning and a booming hammer, laying waste to his enemies. He's an almost effortlessly powerful warrior, and the entire arc of Ragnarok is devoted to the way he learns that his strength and power come from within himself, not from any of his magic weapons. It's his defining feature. So what happens when it doesn't work? In Endgame, Thor sees himself as personally responsible for failing to kill Thanos before he could snap, and when he finally did finish off the Mad Titan, it was too late to fix anything. He goes through almost the same thing that the Hulk does, except that he's made to watch as the last remnants of his people are attacked, and eventually finds out that even his shiny new hammer can't stop Thanos in time. For all his strength, he failed. If his strength defines him, but it couldn't save the billions of lives lost in Infinity War, what's the point? That's the existential crisis Thor's dealing with in Endgame. When we meet back up with Thor 5 years after the snap, he's almost completely inert. That's a very common and very relatable symptom of depression, and so is the idea that he's not just sitting around in the dark being sad. For all the film's over-the-top visuals and jokes about his weight, the movie isn't a cartoonish portrayal of what it's like to deal with depression. We see Thor laughing and hanging out with his friends, but when he's confronted with the idea that he could do something important, the same thing he's failed at before, it just doesn't matter. There's another element of his depression that manifests itself in the film too. He's become an alcoholic. Thor's legendary appetite for beer has always been a source of comedy in the MCU films.
I don't drink tea. What do you drink? Not tea.
Endgame shows us the darker side of that. Like a lot of people with depression, including Valkyrie in Ragnarok, Thor is self-medicating. and his physical change is the result of that. Sadly, that's a pretty relatable element for a lot of viewers, too. One of the reasons Thor's new body was such a surprise is that, unlike a lot of Endgame's other callbacks, there's no precedent for it in the comics. Thor has undergone plenty of changes over the years, including the time he was a 6'6" frog for a few issues, but he's always been drawn with the heroic proportions that you'd expect. As far as his mental state, the closest we've gotten to seeing a truly depressed Thor came when we got a glimpse of a distant future where Thor was the last surviving Asgardian. Like his movie counterpart, All-Father Thor was dealing with isolation, depression, and the toll of millennia of battle that left him with one arm and one eye. The main difference was that this Thor was more than willing to take up his hammer and fight, although his goal was a glorious death in battle. That doesn't mean the Thor comics have been free of fat jokes. For decades, one of the most prominent members of Thor's supporting cast was Volstagg the Voluminous, one of the Warriors 3. He's a once mighty warrior whose waistline is just as expanded as the inflated tales of his glory. While Volstagg was often depicted as a braggart and more than a little cowardly, he's also always been a very positive character who comes through in dire situations. Also, in an interesting contrast of what we see with Thor, he once survived the destruction of Asgard, only to waste away from lack of food before Thor found him and nicknamed him Volstagg the Thin. All of that forms the background, but for some members of Endgame's audience, the possible intent doesn't matter as much as what makes it to the screen. The simple fact is that the reveal of Fat Thor is absolutely played for laughs, and Thor's body is used as a frequent punchline. There are cracks from our heroes about Thor having cheese whiz running through his veins, and even the scene with his mother, one of Endgame's most emotional sequences, ends with Frigga telling him to eat a salad. Part of that undoubtedly comes from the fact that over the past decade, Thor has evolved into a much more comedic character than he might have been if Chris Hemsworth didn't turn out to have a talent for comedy.
He transformed himself into a snake, and he knows that I love snakes. So I went to pick up the snake to admire it, and he transformed back into himself, and he was like, "Yeah, it's me!" And he stabbed me.
That said, once he's done playing Fat Thor, Hemsworth gets to go back to being, well, Chris Hemsworth. The fat jokes are bound to sting regardless, but coming from a dude known for being super heroically ripped and ridiculously handsome, it definitely feels like he's punching down. For some viewers, the jokes at Thor's expense were easy to forgive. Not only did they see Thor's depression and its results as relatable, but the fact that his fellow Avengers are lashing out is an equally realistic depiction of how people around them can react under stress. These characters have always been quick to get snarky with each other, and that's just part of their appeal.
Sometimes I want to punch you in your perfect teeth.
But even within the context of the film, we're still seeing superheroes, the ultimate good guys, making fun of someone's appearance. Context is important, but it's always worth remembering that this is fiction, and calling anything realistic doesn't hold much water in a movie where a guy with rocket boots uses magic space rocks to fight a 7-foot purple alien. For some critics, it just raises the question of whether we would have lost anything if it hadn't been there, or if Thor's depression had been shown in some other way. The flip side to the anger is that for all of its flaws and the sniping from other characters, the action of the movie never really presents Thor's body as a problem. The climax of that emotional scene with Frigga is the present-day post-snap Thor summoning Mjolnir and realizing that despite the guilt he's been feeling for 5 years, he's still as worthy, heroic, and noble as he has always been. Most telling, at the end of the movie, where he truly regains his godly power and makes a stand against Thanos, he doesn't just magically transform back into his usual muscular body. The only change to his physical appearance is that his unkempt beard is now neatly braided. He's still as hefty as he was, but he's also as strong as ever. As corny as it might sound, all he really needed was to talk to someone who understands what he's going through. The fact that there's no physical difference between the depressed, apathetic Thor of the beginning of the film and the hero we see at the end seems to indicate the filmmaker's sincerity in presenting the depression, not the weight gain, as the problem to be conquered. Still, the jokes at his expense are very much a part of the film, and it's hard to believe that Thor won't be showing up in future MCU films with his traditional jacked bodybuilder physique. The way it's treated going forward is going to go a long way in determining how audiences look back on it here.
Avengers Endgame took secrecy to all new levels with its intentionally spoiler-free marketing efforts. Once the movie was released, though, the behind-the-scenes info began pouring out. Here are some of the most interesting things to emerge. It's a well-known fact that directors Joe and Anthony Russo will go to extreme lengths to keep their Marvel creations under wraps. For example, they teasingly apologized to the spoiler-prone Tom Holland for dusting Spidey at the end of Infinity War and consequently keeping him at arm's length for the promotion of Endgame. They also pretended to fire Mark Ruffalo after a string of spoilers had put him on thin ice. One of the best methods for keeping everyone in the dark, though, was the way the Russos handled the script. Most of the actors got only pieces of the screenplay to work from, and apparently Ruffalo got a particularly spoiler-proof version of the script. The Hulk actor was only given a partial script with additional dummy scenes in it, according to an interview with E! News.
I don't know what's gonna happen. I'm shot 5 different endings to this movie.
Really?
I didn't even get a whole script to this movie.
But even that didn't stop him from accidentally giving something away. In that same interview, he joked about what he presumably thought was one of those dummy scenes. The spoiler?
He gets married in this.
They have to throw Mark off the scent.
Oops. Endgame is the second MCU outing for Carol Danvers, who arrived on the scene just weeks earlier in her own superhero flick, Captain Marvel. For actress Brie Larson, though, that wasn't the case. Larson had filmed her scenes for Endgame before she ever had a chance to flesh out the character in her own film. As an added twist, the first scene she ever filmed was set during the events of Endgame, but technically ended up in Captain Marvel. On The Tonight Show, Larson recalled that her first day of filming was for the end credits scene for her own film, which showed her arriving at the Avengers facility post-snap.
So whip hands to me and I go, "Where's Fury?" I didn't know that was the tag for Captain Marvel. I didn't know what that was that we were shooting. There was also nobody else there.
In true Russo fashion, though, the actress was only given her lines and filmed her part alone in front of a green screen. That's taking secrecy to a whole new level. While the Russo brothers bent over backwards to keep actors like Ruffalo, Holland, and Larson from spoiling the script, there was one person that they didn't mind showing the whole thing to: Robert Downey Jr. While discussing Infinity War and Endgame in an interview with Rotten Tomatoes, the pair talked about keeping things secret.
RDJ was probably the only one to actually read the entire script. Evans might have read
Part of
the
our
script.
motivation to do that is it just takes a lot of pressure off of people.
Everything had started with Iron Man just a decade earlier, with Endgame ultimately serving as the Iron Avengers swan song. It's only appropriate that RDJ would be trusted with some of the most sensitive MCU knowledge to ever exist. When the Avengers break into teams for their time heist in Endgame, Rocket and Thor are sent to Asgard during the events of Thor: The Dark World to retrieve the Reality Stone. At that point in time, the stone is using the God of Thunder's ex, Jane Foster, as a host. Foster, who's been absent from Marvel films since The Dark World, appears on screen a few times before Rocket is able to get the Reality Stone out of her. But it turns out that Foster actress Natalie Portman didn't actually film any new footage for Endgame. In an interview with Entertainment Weekly, the Russos explained that they had been able to salvage unused footage from The Dark World in order to get all of the scenes they needed. While the footage was enough for them to work with, they did ask the actress to record a small bit of voiceover. In the days after Endgame lit up the theater marquees, Star-Lord actor Chris Pratt stirred up attention by releasing a video he'd taken on set while preparing for one of the film's key action sequences. The once-in-a-lifetime video showed nearly all of the famous actors, mostly in sweats and comfortable clothing, chatting and discussing their scenes as casually as if they were a group of high schoolers hanging out after class. The video gave a unique glimpse into the inner workings of a film that had been kept tightly under wraps since day one. Stan Lee was a comic book titan for over half a century. While he was an important creative mind behind the scenes for decades, his long relationship with Marvel also led to a memorable series of fan-favorite cameos throughout various Marvel movies. When Lee passed away in late 2018, fans began theorizing about when his last cameo would surface. A year earlier, it had been revealed that Lee had filmed 5 different cameos for upcoming films. The fact that he was apparently batching his cameos naturally left the possibility that he could be popping into films for an indefinite amount of time. Endgame delivered a shot of a younger-looking hippie version of Lee driving by the 1970s S.H.I.E.L.D. headquarters, shouting, "Make love, not war." As it turned out, that scene will be Lee's last ever cameo, and it's a fitting farewell. The Russos confirmed after the fact that it's the last Stan Lee cameo that made it to film. In a twist that few people saw coming in Endgame, Natasha Romanoff ended up sacrificing herself for the Soul Stone. It was a beautifully redemptive way to end her own heroic story, which had been going on in the background for nearly the entire MCU. But, of course, this is Marvel, and there's always the question of whether they'll bring her back. With Gamora's re-entrance into the future from the past in Endgame, anything is possible, except not with Romanoff. Her story seems closed for good this time. Screenwriters Christopher Marcus and Stephen McFeely explained to the New York Times, her journey in our minds had come to an end if she could get the Avengers back. She has a chance to get them back, that's a thing she would trade for. During her memorial scene on the dock, the surviving hero's conversation drove home the point that the cost of the Soul Stone is a permanent one. While there's no doubt that Black Widow will be remembered by fans for years to come, she's gone for good, except presumably for her upcoming movie. While Black Widow may have ultimately been given a powerful closing to her own story, Romanoff's death wasn't always a sure thing. After all, movies aren't completely finished until the release date. The shawarma end credit scene from Avengers wasn't even added until the week that the film was released, so it should come as no surprise that there was a lot of shifting and changing as they went along. One of those changes? The events on Vormir. Writers Marcus and McFeely explained that there was a version of the script that had Clint Barton sacrificing himself for the stone instead of Romanoff. But when they gave the scene to the visual effects producer Jen Underdahl, she apparently told them, "Don't you take this away from her." The response clearly impacted the writers, who ultimately acknowledged that it had to be Romanoff. It turns out that Marcus and McFeely have had a working master document since Captain America: Civil War, where they kept track of different things they wanted to do with their heroes' character arcs. It turns out that Endgame was the movie where they got to run wild. In particular, McFeely said that they wanted to explore Marvel's tradition of what-if comics, alternate universe presentations of Marvel events playing out differently. The writers dove in and incorporated a bunch of what-if scenarios right into the Endgame plot. The writers told the New York Times, "Well, this is our what-if. If you lost, Thor becomes fat, Natasha becomes a shut-in, Steve becomes depressed, Tony gets on with his life, Hulk is a superhero, Clint becomes a murdering maniac." While there were solid reasons for every character's shift in tone, there's no doubt that the writers were happy to push the heroes out of their comfort zone for the entertainment of all. Infinity War and Endgame may be two distinctly different movies, but the subject matter that they handle is clearly interwoven. This left the writers and directors constantly scrambling to figure out how to puzzle a bunch of different pieces of storyline together in a coherent way that left them with two distinct, yet connected movies. At one point, the plan was to have Hulk and Banner resolve their differences in Infinity War. However, it felt like too much of a positive in the middle of a pretty sad ending, so the filmmakers bumped it to Endgame. They also left out the actual transformation, banking on Scott Lang in the dinner scene to provide the right amount of confusion to help bridge the gap. In the same vein, Hawkeye's opening scene in Endgame where he loses his family was nearly tacked on to the end of Infinity War, but it once again felt out of place. The biggest decision of all was where to place the snap. They debated putting it earlier in Infinity War, but it would have left almost nothing for the ending. On the other hand, if they pushed it to Endgame, it would have left the first movie with no ending at all. Knowing when to reverse the snap was nearly as challenging. Thankfully, the creative minds behind the scenes managed to eventually pull it all together into two coherent stories. Scott Lang was right, Endgame is a time heist movie. It wasn't the writers who came up with that one, though, but Marvel boss Kevin Feige himself. Feige's original suggestion was to use time travel to resolve the Infinity War plot, with the centerpiece being the Time Stone. It wasn't until the filmmakers began fleshing things out that the quantum realm became the key plot device to move the time travel element forward. Once time travel was in the mix, there was one obvious point that had to make it into the film: the Battle of New York. But the writers initially felt it was too pandery to head back to the original Avengers film, so they tried a ton of alternatives first. At one point, they had Tony Stark on Asgard in a stealth suit fighting Heimdall, and the planet Morag was originally underwater. At another point, the Avengers stopped by Triskelion and even hopped in a car to visit Doctor Strange. When the rubber hit the road, though, writers and directors alike finally decided that heading back to the Chitauri-infested streets of New York was the best option of the bunch. The sequence in Endgame when our heroes put their heist plan to the test shows that time travel within the MCU is distinctly different than the way it's been represented in movies like Time Cop, Hot Tub Time Machine, or Back to the Future.
Doc, are you telling me that you built a time machine out of a DeLorean?
It also establishes that Pym particles are in extremely limited supply. Tony Stark and Steve Rogers head back on a potentially one-way trip to the 70s in the hope of scrounging up more particles just to keep everything from falling apart. This left fans scratching their heads when Nebula casually brought Thanos' entire planet-sized ship and its massive army into the present. Where on Earth did they get the impossibly huge number of particles to pull off a stunt like that? Joe Russo cleared up the disconnect in an interview, offering an elegantly simple solution. When 2014 Nebula surrenders the Pym particles to her father, they aren't for him to use to time travel, they're for scientific research. Thanos, a genius himself, with the help of the powerful sorcerer Ebony Maw, studied the Pym particles and then mass-produced them in order to defeat the Avengers once and for all.
Since his debut in 1962, the mighty Thor has been one of the Marvel Universe's most powerful heroes. Even if you're caught up on his adventures, can recite the inscription on his hammer from memory, and know the name of the magical metal it was crafted from, here are a few things about Odin's favorite son that you'd be surprised to learn. Kirby's Three Thors. When Stan Lee and Jack Kirby were creating the Marvel Universe in the 60s, they'd already been working in comics for 20 years. With that in mind, it might not be surprising that Journey into Mystery number 83 wasn't Kirby's first shot at doing a story about the Norse god of thunder. That honor goes to Adventure Comics number 75. In a story by Kirby and his Captain America collaborator Joe Simon, the Golden Age Sandman goes up against a crook named Fairy Tale Fenton, who masquerades as the hammer-swinging thunder god in order to pull off daring robberies. After injuring the Sandman's sidekick and sparking a full-on riot, Fenton is finally brought down and sent packing, never to be seen again. 15 years later, Kirby would hit a little closer to the mark with Tales of the Unexpected number 16. A 6-page story called The Magic Hammer featured a Thor with plenty of familiar design elements and a version of Mjolnir that looks an awful lot like the one that would show up at Marvel at the start of the next decade. It was even hidden on Earth until it was found by a mere mortal who could tap into its power. Although in this case, it was discovered by a cowboy crook named Bard who was anything but worthy. The real twist though, while Kirby's third shot at Thor would be a success for the fledgling Marvel Comics, both the Sandman story and Tales of the Unexpected were published by DC. Journey into Mystery. Building off the success that they'd found by introducing the Fantastic Four the previous year, Lee and Kirby decided in 1962 to expand their superhero universe, and the mighty Thor charged into the pages of Journey into Mystery number 83. For the most part, the Stone Men from Saturn follows the usual beats of the sci-fi monster comics that Marvel had been publishing in the 50s. Aliens invade Earth, but get scared off when they encounter someone who's strong enough to stand against them. The big difference is that the someone is, of course, Dr. Don Blake, who finds a cane tucked away in a cave in Norway that can transform him into Thor. But there's another important character who made his debut in that issue. In 2006, the Planet Hulk storyline revealed that one of those stone men from Saturn fled back to the stars and wound up stranded on the planet Sakaar, living as a gladiator. His name was Korg, and while a similar rock monster appeared in the opening of Thor: The Dark World in a tribute to that first issue, Korg himself would wind up being a significant character in Thor: Ragnarok.
Piss off, Ghost!
Dr. Don who? Marvel superheroes are often defined by having disadvantages in their civilian identities that bleed into their heroic exploits. Iron Man had to wear the chest plate of his armor all the time in order to keep the shrapnel from moving closer to his heart. Spider-Man was perpetually broke and struggled with school. For Thor, the consequence of losing control of his hammer for 60 seconds was that he would turn back into his human identity, Dr. Donald Blake, a disabled doctor who worked with his nurse and love interest, Jane Foster. In the 80s, Marvel introduced a big twist. Don Blake didn't actually exist. Instead, Thor's human form was created by Odin in order to teach his son the folly of his arrogance. By imprisoning him in the body of a human, Odin hoped that Thor would stop bragging and learn to put the needs of others before his own. Considering the stories we've gotten since, it's safe to say that it worked. Tales of Asgard. While Thor himself was in the spotlight, Lee and Kirby added an awful lot to Marvel's version of the Norse pantheon to help distinguish it from the classic mythology. The Tales of Asgard backup stories adapted myths and helped introduce new characters like Fandral the Dashing, Hogun the Grim, and Volstagg the Voluminous, better known as the Warriors 3.
Never cared for spies. Exquisite.
Everything you need to know about these three characters is right there in their names. Fandral is a swashbuckler based on the on-screen exploits of Robin Hood actor Errol Flynn, while Hogun was a fearsome fighter that, according to Lee, was based on Charles Bronson. Volstagg was inspired by Falstaff from Shakespeare's Henry IV, an aging warrior who often exaggerated his own accomplishments and was eventually revealed to have an equally voluminous wife and about a dozen kids. The Warriors 3 quickly became fan-favorite supporting characters and even managed to spin off into a few stories focused entirely on them as a leading trio. The Thor Corps. When Walt Simonson took over Thor in 1983 for a truly definitive run on the character, one of the biggest changes he made was the introduction of Beta Ray Bill, an alien everyman who looked like a cross between an orange humanoid and a skeletal horse. Bill was the chosen defender of his race as they fled the destruction of their home planet. After a cosmic misunderstanding led him into a brutal battle against Thor, he proved he was worthy to hoist the hammer, and Odin granted him one of his own, Stormbreaker. Bill wasn't the only other Marvel character to ever wield the power of Thor. In 1988, Tom DeFalco and Ron Frenz gave Thor a new secret identity in the form of Eric Masterson, an architect whose inexperience with godly powers gave him a pretty big challenge in crime fighting. In 1993, the two characters were separated, but Eric continued his heroic career as Thunderstrike, wielding a magical mace with the same name. In Thor number 384, they introduced Dargo Kitor, a resident of a 26th century dystopia who lifted Mjolnir and became that era's version of Thor. Needless to say, he crossed over to the core Marvel universe to battle the Fantastic Four on the orders of Zarko, the Tomorrow Man. No, really, that's the actual name of a Marvel character. With all these Thors running around at the same time, they obviously had to form a team. Thus was born the Thor Corps, in which Thor, Beta Ray Bill, Thunderstrike, and Dargo united for a battle across time and space that would basically prove how wild comics in the 90s could be. The Incredible Hulk returns. Until the launch of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, the Incredible Hulk TV show was one of Marvel's greatest mass media successes. It ran for 5 seasons and gave the Hulk one of the most memorable catchphrases of all time.
Don't make me angry. You wouldn't like me when I'm angry.
When Bill Bixby and Lou Ferrigno returned as Banner and his green alter ego for a series of TV movies, Marvel used that popularity to shift the spotlight on a few of their other characters. The second, Trial of the Incredible Hulk, would use its courtroom setting to introduce TV audiences to Marvel's resident attorney, Daredevil. But the first one pit the Incredible Hulk against the mighty Thor. In this case, Thor was played by Eric Kramer, and while his TV appearance did include Don Blake, it wasn't as Thor's alter ego. Instead, Blake found himself in a sort of Aladdin situation where Thor was compelled to do his bidding, leading to a pretty weird scene where Blake and Thor hung out in a bar trying to decide whether Thor should take up a career as a crime fighter. Clore goes bad. In 2006, the Marvel Universe was divided in the Civil War crossover. On one side, Iron Man was pushing for and eventually enforcing the Superhuman Registration Act, which would require all superheroes to sign up with the government for training, organization, and oversight. On the other, Captain America and a band of rebels were fighting against the SHRA in the name of freedom and the slippery slope that would inevitably lead to giant robots rounding up mutants. It stands to reason that whichever side got Marvel's most powerful heroes would have a pretty big advantage. But there was a problem. The Hulk was out in the depths of space, and Thor was temporarily no longer alive. But Tony Stark didn't let a problem like that stop him. With a strand of Asgardian hair and some pseudoscience, he and Reed Richards were able to cook up the pro-registration side's ultimate weapon, a cybernetic clone of Thor that was quickly dubbed Clore. Given how well cyborgs and clones have gone for, the entire history of comics, it won't surprise you that Clore went rogue at his earliest opportunity and ended up blowing a hole through a hero called Goliath. While Clore was smashed to bits by Hercules at the end of Civil War, he was eventually rebuilt and christened Ragnarok, cropping up in the pages of Dark Avengers before the real Thor returned to Midgard and proved that Ragnarok couldn't hold up to the genuine article. You should have brought more Thors. Thor's identity has been pretty malleable ever since Beta Ray Bill first hefted the hammer back in 1983. But recent stories have seen more people claiming the title than ever before. A 2013 story saw the arrival of Gorr the God Butcher, a cosmic threat so dire that in order to defeat him, Thor had to team up with the greatest warriors he could think of, himself, twice. Together with a young Thor who had yet to prove himself worthy of Mjolnir, and an older, one-eyed, one-armed version who had taken Odin's role as Allfather, they united to defeat the God Butcher. It's a more Gorr Thor Corps. In 2014, after the Odinson's worthiness was called into question, Mjolnir found a replacement in the form of a new Thor, one whose arrival changed the inscription to read, "If she be worthy." This Thor's identity was initially played as a mystery, but was eventually revealed to be the original Thor's former love interest, Jane Foster, whose mortal form was dying of cancer. She proved herself to be more than capable of living up to her namesake, but during a desperate struggle against the monstrous Mangog, she was only able to defeat him by hurling Mjolnir into the sun, apparently destroying it, and ending her own life in the process. In Thor Girl, we don't talk about Thor Girl.
Steve Rogers, the World War II hero and perennial Avenger known as Captain America, has been a cultural icon since he was famously introduced punching Adolf Hitler in the face on the cover of Captain America Comics #1. While you might already know about his decades spent as an icicle or his frenemy relationship with Iron Man, there's plenty of lesser-known details about the Sentinel of Liberty. Here is the untold truth of Captain America.
Before we get started, does anyone want to get out?
He trains every Avenger. Captain America is among the finest hand-to-hand combatants in the Marvel Universe thanks to his vast experience, training, and enhanced strength and reflexes. As such, he trains just about every hero who has come through the Avengers' revolving door. Among his more interesting students, the invincible Iron Man, She-Hulk, Hawkeye, and even Mary Jane Watson. Maybe he should be called Drill Sergeant America.
Your fighting style is to tackle people or blast them. If I had to guess, I'd say that you've never been in an actual fight in your life.
Multiple Buckies. Almost as well known as Cap himself is his original sidekick, Bucky Barnes. Barnes was a mascot at the military base where Rogers was stationed in the early days of World War II, who was taken under the captain's wings. Bucky was presumed dead along with Cap in the fateful plane crash that led to Cap's hibernation, although the young sidekick would return decades later as the Winter Soldier.
Bucky? Who the hell is Bucky?
Rogers would eventually pick up another young sidekick in the modern era, Rick Jones. Rick Jones was directly involved in the accident which created the Hulk, and it was his distress call which initially caused the Avengers to form. Having been taken in by the team as an honorary member, Jones answered the call when Cap found himself in need of another partner, undergoing combat training and even for a time wearing Bucky's old uniform. The partnership didn't last long, but Rick Jones would continue to be a sidekick for just about everyone in the Marvel Universe. Replaced by Black Panther. In Avengers number 47, Cap decides to take a leave of absence from the team to set off on his own adventures, a journey that would bring him to Wakanda, where he would encounter perhaps his only viable replacement in Black Panther.
Tell me, Captain America, is it really your shield?
After helping Cap to foil a plot by Baron Zemo to destroy the United States using advanced weaponry, T'Challa accompanies Cap back to America, mulling over his suggestion to join the Avengers as Cap's replacement. T'Challa quickly proves his worth in a fight against the Grim Reaper, and the grateful team makes T'Challa a full-fledged member. After that, Cap would only make cameo appearances in Avengers comics until returning to the team a full 3 years later. The Falcon and the Red Skull. Sam Wilson, the Falcon, has been Cap's staunchest friend and ally over the years. Their formal partnership began way back in 1971's Captain America number 133. But strangely, their long association never would have happened if not for one of the Red Skull's many evil plots to kill Captain America. In Captain America number 117, Steve Rogers is banished to a mysterious island after getting his body switched with the Red Skull. While there, Cap disguises himself as a normal guy and runs into Sam Wilson, a Harlem bird enthusiast who trains with Cap to become the Falcon. Together, the two of them foil the Red Skull's plot. Cap gets his body back, and Sam Wilson embarks on a long crime-fighting career as the Falcon. Captain America and the Captain Americas. Steve Rogers might be the most famous Captain America, but he's far from the only one. After becoming disillusioned with America and donning the new identity of Nomad, Steve Rogers left the Captain America identity available, and a trio of schmoes tried out for the job. While the first two bailed after realizing just how perilous the job was, Roscoe Simmons received training from the Falcon himself. Unfortunately, he met a gruesome end at the hands of the Red Skull, forcing Rogers to return as Captain America to end the Skull's murderous wrath. Later, Racked by fear of compromising his principles, he surrendered the official Captain America role to John Walker, the Super Patriot, in favor of operating independently as the Captain. Walker even kept Cap's shield during this time, while Rogers used a replica. John Walker would later become U.S. agent once Steve Rogers returned to reclaim the shield and trademark identity. In addition, both Bucky Barnes and Sam Wilson have likewise taken over the mantle, but Rogers has always found his way back from death, retirement, or even just comic book limbo. You
just don't know when to give up, do you?
I can do this all day.
Will the real Cap please stand up? In 2016, Marvel used the relaunch title Captain America Steve Rogers to introduce the most insanely controversial plot twist in a history full of them. At the issue's end, Cap suddenly murders his sidekick Jack Flag before uttering 2 words which had Cap fans the world over reeling in shock: "Hail Hydra." It turned out that Rogers had been reconstructed by a sentient version of the Cosmic Cube after a near-death experience. Unfortunately, the Red Skull had indoctrinated the cube in one of the many times that he had wielded it, causing Rogers' entire history to be retconned as a Hydra secret agent. As you might expect, the real Captain America managed to escape his imprisonment inside the cube's memory and promptly defeated his fascist counterpart. What makes a shield?
When Captain America throws his mighty shield, all those who chose to oppose his shield must yield.
Cap's shield is perhaps the most iconic tool in any superhero's arsenal. Not only is it virtually indestructible, it can absorb vast amounts of kinetic energy, which is why it can withstand blows from the Hulk or Thor without simply sending Cap flying. In its original comic incarnation, the shield isn't pure vibranium, but an alloy accidentally created by scientist Myron McLean in a metallurgical accident. McLean was tasked by the US government with the creation of a super strong metal to be used in tanks, and one night while laboring over the project, McLean fell asleep. He awoke to find that the materials he'd been working with had mysteriously bonded, and cast the new substance using a disc-shaped mold for tank hatches. The government gifted Cap with a shield after he'd proven his mettle in the field, and McLean was never able to duplicate the process which created it, although repeated attempts would years later result in the creation of adamantium, the famously strong metal of which Wolverine's skeleton is made. Replicas of Cap's shield would be employed for various purposes over the years, but Cap always preferred the real deal. Like the super soldier himself, it's one of a kind. Shield throwing sense. It's a common misconception that Cap's shield must be equipped with some kind of technology to make it return to him like a boomerang, but this isn't the case. The shield's ability to absorb and disperse kinetic energy means that once bounced off an object, it will basically keep bouncing forever until caught, and Cap's understanding of its properties enable him to predict its flight path with unerring accuracy. Handling it properly is practically a superpower unto itself, to the point where even the 2 most accomplished heroes to take up Cap's mantle, Sam Wilson and Bucky Barnes, both struggled mightily to learn how to use it as an offensive weapon, even with extensive training from Rogers. However, there is one Avenger for whom handling the shield wasn't much of a problem: Clint Barton, Hawkeye, perhaps the one hero whose mastery of physics and ballistics is on par with Cap's. Leave it to the most underrated Avenger to measure up to Cap's exacting standards.
Winning over audiences with his joyfulness, hyper-literal language, and sense of loyalty, the interstellar warrior Drax the Destroyer is one of the brightest figures in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. You couldn't quite say the same for his comic book counterpart. In many ways, Dave Bautista's interpretation of Drax is barely recognizable from the character in the comics, and for once, that's not a bad thing. Since his debut in 1973's Iron Man number 55, Drax the Destroyer has gone through drastic shifts in intelligence, temperament, and physical power. He's been one of Marvel's most powerful heroes, and he's also been one of its dumbest. He's a character who has literally lived many lives, so the fact that the Drax of the movies feels like a completely different person is in keeping with a long tradition of reinvention. From his quest for vengeance against Thanos to his surprising connection to the planet Earth, here is everything you need to know about Drax the Destroyer.
Nothing goes over my head. My reflexes are too fast. I would catch it.
Where I'm from. Drax's origin story appeared in 1974's Captain Marvel number 32, written by Jim Starlin. In the issue, readers learn about the hero's homeworld, and it's the last place you'd expect: Earth. As originally written by Starlin, Drax was a human being by the name of Arthur Douglas who had a wife named Yvette and a daughter, Heather. During Thanos' first scouting mission to Earth, Arthur and his family had the bad luck to be on the road in the Nevada desert as the Titan flew by in his ship. Thanos attacked, fatally wounding Arthur and Yvette. Unbeknownst to anyone, Heather escaped, but we'll have more to say about her later. After the incident, Thanos' father Mentor called out to Kronos, father of the gods, for help in stopping his wayward son. Kronos obliged Mentor and built a super powerful body which he used as a vessel for Arthur's soul. Arthur Douglas may have been no more, but his soul and sense of vengeance lived on in a new form, Drax. It's a vastly different origin story in the MCU. In Guardians of the Galaxy, Drax's comic book origins as a human man are completely ignored. Instead of Yvette and Heather, he had a wife named Hovat and a daughter named Kamaria. Both of them met their ends thanks to Ronan the Accuser acting on orders from Thanos.
What were they like?
My wife and daughter, they were kind, brave, true.
The rewrite of the origin story is a simple but effective change. The movie version keeps Drax's thirst for vengeance, just without the complicated wrinkle of extraterrestrial reincarnation.
I kind of feel like Drax is now mine.
Power levels. As far as his strength is concerned, the Drax of the movies is fairly middle tier. You certainly wouldn't want to arm wrestle him, but he also better not get on the Hulk's bad side. That wasn't always the case, as the Drax of the comics has occasionally been one of Marvel's most powerful superheroes. The Destroyer has regularly held his own against the absolute A-list of Marvel tough guys, including Thor, the Silver Surfer, and the Hulk. Along with having a lot more strength, the Drax of the comics used to have the power of flight, regularly flying through space without a helmet or spacesuit. He also had the ability to fire powerful energy blasts from his hands. The Drax of the panels became more like what we see in the movies in 2005's Drax the Destroyer miniseries. After having one body destroyed in the second issue, Drax was reborn, smaller and less physically powerful, but with a much greater degree of intelligence than the vengeance-driven brute he used to be. Bring me Thanos. Even though destroying Thanos is Drax's sole purpose, he hasn't proven himself to be particularly good at his job. In Drax's earliest appearances, his obsession with Thanos is so intense that he can be as much of a liability to the heroes on his side as a help. He cares little about plans, schemes, or strategies. He simply throws himself at the Mad Titan. When he reappeared after a long absence in 1990's Silver Surfer number 37, he attacked everyone in sight, screaming "Where's Thanos?" over and over, not listening or caring about the fact that no one knew the answer. In 2006's Annihilation number 4, after over 3 decades of trying and failing, Drax finally managed to exact his vengeance against Thanos. Naturally, he just had to do it while Thanos was trying to save the galaxy during one of his rare good guy turns. As Thanos works to stop the villain Annihilus from destroying all life in the universe, Drax decides his vengeance is more important and punches Thanos' heart out of his chest. Sure, the timing of it was pretty bad, but you can't blame a guy for doing what he was born to do. My daughter Moondragon. In the comics, Drax eventually learns that his daughter Heather survived the attack in the desert. Rescued by Thanos' father Mentor, Heather was brought to Titan and raised there by a group of powerful monks where she developed the powers of a superhero, taking on the name Moondragon. Though Moondragon would eventually join the Avengers, the Defenders, the Infinity Watch, and even the Guardians of the Galaxy, she didn't always share the most heroic values of her comrades. Sometimes she acted downright evil. While traveling through space with Drax, she came across a planet immersed in war and solved the problem by mentally enslaving all the inhabitants. To help persuade his daughter to take another course of action, Drax contacted the Avengers for help. Along with a mind-controlled Thor, Moondragon fought against Drax and succeeded in defeating him. It was the ultimate injustice. He was felled by his own daughter and didn't even really deserve it.
You people have issues.
Well, of course I have issues. That's my freaking father!
As you might imagine, Drax and Moondragon's relationship has been pretty strained ever since. The Idiot. When Drax returned to life in Silver Surfer number 35, his mind wasn't fully healed. Though still intent on securing Thanos' destruction, the intergalactic warrior came back a little more lovable and a whole lot dumber. Drax's diminished IQ was used for comedic purposes, with his brute strength and odd passions being mined for laughs. When Adam Warlock arrives to recruit Drax for a new team, Drax is busy smashing TV monitors because he's angry the transmission of the Earth show ALF has been interrupted. Drax's mind didn't stay dull forever, but his intelligence wasn't restored fully in a way that stuck, until 2005's Drax the Destroyer miniseries. No matter what intelligence level he's been at, though, he's always remembered how to play a mean sax. A cosmic custodian. The conclusion of the Infinity Gauntlet story left the Gauntlet and its 6 gems under the guardianship of Adam Warlock. Marvel's Cosmic Pantheon wasn't happy with this arrangement, however, and encouraged him to share the burden. Keeping the Soul Gem for himself, Adam chose 5 people to be the guardians of the remaining gems, creating a team known as the Infinity Watch. Warlock would later wonder if he had made the right decisions with the people he chose to carry the gems, fearing the influence of the Infinity Gauntlet had corrupted his judgment. It's no surprise why he thought this. He gave the Space Gem to the mischievous Pip the Troll, who immediately used it to steal, among other things, an Avengers Quinjet. The Mind Gem went to Moondragon, a woman you'll recall once used her powers to enslave an entire world. The Reality Gem went to Thanos, of all people. Finally, Adam gave the Power Gem to Drax, the dim-witted brute who destroys things when he misses an episode of Alf. Good leadership, Adam. Famously huge. The movie Drax is an alien, while the comic book Drax is an Earthling who is forced into a constructed body. This naturally means there are a number of differences between them. One of the more surprising differences? Well, there's a specific bodily function comic book Drax doesn't have to worry about. In the beginning of Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, Rocket threatens to fill up Peter Quill's pillow with fecal matter while he sleeps because that's the kind of mature and responsible team the Guardians are.
You put your turd in my bed, I shave you.
Oh, it won't be my turd. It'll be Drax's.
I have famously huge turds.
Believe it or not, this is an invention specific to the movies. In the comics, the size of Drax's bowel movements isn't any sort of legend. As it turns out, he doesn't have them at all. In Warlock and the Infinity Watch number 2, when Adam Warlock gives Drax the Power Gem, Drax doesn't know what to do with it. Thinking he's been handed a jelly bean, he promptly eats it. Understandably, Gamora freaks out, and Warlock tries to reassure her, reminding her that the gem is indestructible and won't digest. When she continues to protest, Warlock says, "Drax's physical being is unlike most creatures. I'll explain later. Trust me, he won't lose it." In other words, the Drax of the comic books doesn't poop. No wonder he seems so much happier in the movies.
Thanos' adopted daughter is the highlight of almost every Guardians of the Galaxy story she appears in. But if you only know Gamora from the Marvel Cinematic Universe, you're missing out. She's much more than a world-class assassin. She's also a time traveler, a mother, a fashion icon, and a lover. And she's wielded one of the most powerful weapons ever made. Gamora's comic backstory is full of twists and turns that are crazy in all the best ways. There's a reason Gamora is called the most dangerous woman in the universe. Let's take a look at some of the story elements you might not know about Marvel's green superheroine. Unfortunate origin. In the MCU, Gamora's origin is pretty straightforward. Her planet was wiped out by Thanos, who rescued her and raised her to be a warrior. She eventually turned on Thanos, teamed up with Star-Lord, Rocket, Drax, and Groot, and the rest is history. In the comics, Gamora first appeared in Strange Tales number 180, but we don't learn her history until Warlock number 10. As the story goes, Thanos correctly predicted that the villainous Magus, a time-warped version of hero Adam Warlock and leader of the tyrannical Universal Church of Truth, threatened his plans for galactic domination. So Thanos needed a weapon he could use to stop Magus before he grew too powerful. He found one in the future. Years after Warlock number 10 takes place, Magus' soldiers killed Gamora's kinsfolk, the pacifist Zen Huberas, as part of their crusade. Thanos, however, managed to rescue Gamora at the last minute, took her to the present, and trained her to stop Magus once and for all. Her assassination attempt fails, and Gamora flat out perishes after turning on Thanos, but she still helps Adam Warlock beat Magus and the Church anyway. Unseen action. Like her origin story, Gamora's earliest days are pretty confusing. After 2 appearances in Strange Tales, her story moves into the Warlock standalone series. Then the struggle between Thanos, Adam, and Gamora concludes in Avengers Annual number 7 and Marvel 2-in-1 Annual number 2. As a result of all this ping-ponging between different books, there's one big hole. While Gamora eventually learns about Thanos' true nature and betrays him, we never actually see the whole story. In Warlock number 15, Gamora is tasked by Thanos to hunt down Adam Warlock, but is attacked en route by Drax. But then the series ends. Next we see her, she's been left for dead by Thanos himself. So what happened? Seeing Gamora betray her surrogate father should have been a real big moment, but it was reduced to 3 flashback panels. According to author Jim Starlin, Warlock was ultimately canceled due to poor sales, so he had limited pages to wrap the story up. which meant supporting characters like Gamora got the short end of the stick, leaving her epic family drama as a footnote. 9 lives. Gamora might be good at taking lives, but that doesn't mean she hasn't lost her own a time or two. When she was a kid, she snuck out against Thanos' wishes on the planet Tartunla No. 7 and got attacked and slaughtered by a roving street gang. Thanos had to rebuild her from artificial parts, and she lost her tear ducts in the deal. We also see Gamora die in Avengers Annual No. 7, and while her body perishes, her soul is saved by Adam Warlock, but her spirit, along with Warlocks and Pip the Trolls, ended up safely ensconced inside the Soul Gem, one of the Infinity Stones. She returns to life in the Infinity Gauntlet No. 1, published about 14 years later, but there's a catch. Her soul is put into the corpse of a woman named Bambi Long. Even when Gamora is alive, she's still technically not. When Thanos uses the Infinity Gauntlet to end half of the life in the universe, Gamora bites it again, although Nebula resurrects her and everyone else. In other words, Gamora might be one of the strongest heroes in the universe, but her life tends to come and go. Gem Carrier. So far, Marvel's movies have been all about the Infinity Stones, 6 brightly colored and infinitely powerful rocks that act as the MacGuffins for the entire MCU. The Red Skull used one to fuel his superweapons. Loki's scepter held the Mind Stone, which later ended up bringing the Vision to life. The Reality Stone pops up in Thor, The Dark World. The Time Stone plays a crucial role in Doctor Strange. And the Power Stone is the thing that drives the action in Guardians of the Galaxy. The Infinity Gems have comic book counterparts, of course, although on the printed page they're better known as the Soul or Infinity Gems. They've been around since 1972 and they play a big role in Infinity Gauntlet, which is a foundation for Avengers Infinity War. It's not just Thanos that wielded the gems, however. After Infinity Gauntlet, Adam Warlock took control of the Infinity Gems, but higher powers than him decided that it was too much power for one person to handle, and distributed the gems among some of Marvel's cosmic heroes, including Gamora. As part of the super team known as Infinity Watch, Gamora was entrusted with guarding the Time Gem. Now Gamora didn't actually know how to use the Time Gem, although she'd occasionally get prophetic visions thanks to the gem's influence, and she eventually gave up her duties and left the Watch. The gems were stolen and Infinity Watch disbanded shortly thereafter. Mommy Dearest. By now you might have noticed that Adam Warlock plays a big part in Gamora's pre-Guardians life. Given the laws of comic book relationships, that means they'll inevitably hook up. Warlock and Gamora didn't just become a couple, however, they'll actually have a child together, albeit an adopted one. In Infinity Abyss, Jim Starlin's 2002 entry into his long-running Infinity Saga, 5 clones of Thanos called the Thanosi set out to kill Thanos and destroy the universe. Naturally, Warlock, Gamora, and their friends try to stop them. The key to the Thanosi scheme is an all-powerful being called Atlas, the anchor of reality since the days of the Roman Empire. When Atlas realizes his time is running out, he realizes he needs to pass on his knowledge to a human girl named Atleza, who was born for this purpose. There's just one problem. Atleza is still a little girl. Gamora and her buddies end up defeating the Thanosi, but Atleza, who's kinda overwhelmed with her newfound cosmic powers, needs training. As such, Gamora and Warlock retire to a pocket dimension to teach her the ways of the universe, while also serving as her foster parents. It's one of the weirdest families imaginable, but for Warlock and Gamora, weird is an everyday thing. With the two of them at her side, Atleza should be just fine.
Monica Rambeau might have debuted in Captain Marvel as an excitable kid, but in the comics, she's a heroine in her own right. In fact, Monica might be one of the most powerful superheroes in the Marvel Universe. This is her story. Monica made her debut in 1982's Amazing Spider-Man Annual No. 16. In this issue, fans are introduced to the spunky future Avenger as Lieutenant Rambeau, an officer climbing the ranks of the New Orleans Harbor Patrol. While on a mission, Rambeau takes a direct shot of extra-dimensional energy from a criminal scientist's mysterious machine. As a result, she is granted incredible power over energy. Monica is able to generate it, manipulate it, absorb it, and even transform her body into pure energy, which enables her to travel at astonishing speed through the vacuum of space. After this incident, Monica encounters some thieves who try to steal her purse. While chasing them down, she accidentally gets into a minor fight with Spider-Man, who's surprised at the amount of power she's packing. But after the misunderstanding is cleared up, Spidey, along with an assist from Iron Man and the Wasp, helps her gain better control over her volatile newfound powers. While Monica was not the first Marvel character to debut in a Spider-Man comic, the issue marks the start of a strong friendship between the Lieutenant and the Wallcrawler. The two would team up in many future comics. Fans of the MCU might identify Carol Danvers, brought to life on screen by Oscar winner Brie Larson, as the one and only Captain Marvel. But off-screen, this couldn't be more incorrect. Within the pages of Marvel Comics, the Captain Marvel name has a long history dating back to the 1960s, originating with the Earthbound Kree warrior, Mar-Vell. Carol Danvers is actually the 7th character to take up the mantle, and she's certainly not the first woman to do it. The first female hero to be known by the name of Captain Marvel was actually none other than Monica Rambeau, who was the second person to take on the mantle. It's the media who originally dubs Monica Captain Marvel, astonished by her energy-based abilities. But curiously, her take on the name has nothing to do with Mar-Vell or the Kree.
Make sense?
Perfectly not confusing.
You can draw a straight line from Carol Danvers' powers to the original Mar-Vell, but Monica's powers and origin story come from a completely different source. Meaning that in Marvel Comics canon, the fact that they shared a name is actually just a giant, confusing coincidence. Although she goes on to change her hero name several times throughout the years, Monica will always be remembered as the first woman to kick butt as Captain Marvel. Monica Rambeau has made many lasting marks on the history of the Marvel Universe. When the Avengers made her a full-fledged member in 1983's Avengers number 231, Monica officially became the first African-American woman to join the team's ranks. Although she was then still pretty new to the superhero life, both Wasp, the team's leader at the time, and Captain America, her second-in-command, admired Monica's powerful abilities and ironclad composure. Monica wasn't the first African-American heroine to join a Marvel super team. That honor goes to Aurora Monroe, better known as the weather-manipulating mutant Storm, who made her comic debut in 1975's giant-size X-Men number 1. In joining the Avengers, Monica continued a proud history and blazed a trail into the future. Throughout the years, a plethora of Marvel superheroes have led the Avengers, ranging from popular characters like Luke Cage to lesser-known types like Dr. Druid. Carol Danvers, then working as Ms. Marvel, has actually led the team before herself. But as it turns out, she isn't the only Captain Marvel to earn that particular distinction. Captain America actually nominates Monica Rambeau, then still known as Captain Marvel, for the team's leadership role in 1987's Avengers number 279, after then-leader Wasp decides to step down. During her time in charge, Rambeau's Avengers battle Greek gods as well as AIM's cosmic, Cuban-powered nightmare robot, Super Adaptoid. Although being in charge certainly suits her, Monica's reign as the leader of the Avengers comes to an abrupt end about a year after her inauguration, after a debilitating accident drains her powers and nearly kills her. Dr. Druid takes over after she resigns, and let's just say, doesn't do such a great job. Marvel has chosen some pretty strange characters to put into the spotlight over the years. Ever heard of Maverick, an energy-absorbing mutant who, like Wolverine, went through the Weapon X program? Probably not. But he got his own 12-issue comic run in 1997. What about Warlock, the shape-shifting alien and X-Men affiliate, who got his own 9-issue run in 1999? No? Well, perhaps you're familiar with the Craptacular B-Sides, a gang of New Jersey teenagers with powers like owning an actually magical Magic 8-Ball. No? Well, they too got their own solo series, back in 2002, and Craptacular is right there in their name. Given how unheard of most of these characters are, it's surprising to the casual fan that they've ever been given their own comic. It's even more shocking when you consider the fact that Monica Rambeau, who leads the freaking Avengers at one point, has never been given her own solo series. Sure, she had a pair of one-shot issues as Captain Marvel, one in 1989 and one in 1994, but never her own multi-issue run. This is a snub of epic proportions, considering Monica's major significance in the Marvel Universe throughout the years. Superheroes tend to go through a lot of names over the years. Sometimes it's to disguise their identity, as when Hawkeye, reborn after the events of the House of M storyline, decides to go by Ronin. Sometimes it's to take up the mantle of another hero's legacy, as when the mutant assassin Psylocke takes on the Captain Britain name after her brother retires from the role. And then sometimes you're Monica Rambeau, and all bets are absolutely off. The one-time Captain Marvel has changed her vigilante alias more times than most fans can keep track of. It begins when she gives the Captain Marvel title to Mar-Vell's son, Genis-Vell, in honor of his father's legacy, and chooses to become Photon instead. However, this isn't the only time that Genis makes things difficult for poor Monica, as he later starts going by Photon too. Instead of fighting him for the name, Rambeau simply changes hers to Pulsar. Although she goes by the name of Pulsar for a while, Monica eventually settles on the name of Spectrum. As Spectrum, Monica plays an important role on Luke Cage's Mighty Avengers team, at one point even going toe-to-toe with the powerful child of Thanos, Proxima Midnight. Fingers crossed that Spectrum sticks, because her costume is undeniably cool. And honestly, doesn't Monica deserve a little stability in her life? Monica Rambeau's time as Photon is relatively uneventful, with one very important exception. In the pages of Next Wave, Agents of Hate, a hilariously self-aware, over-the-top comic series written by Warren Ellis, in which Monica gets to be wild, weird, and wonderful. Not to mention, she acts as the leader of the Agents of Hate, an acronym for Highest Anti-Terrorism Effort, adding yet another entry onto her long list of accomplishments. Joining Monica is an assortment of minor Marvel characters, including X-Force's Tabitha Smith, the monster-hunting Elsa Bloodstone, Machine Man, and a foul-mouthed newbie who simply goes by the Captain. The book is very much a parody of a Marvel comic, with Hate being an obvious play on S.H.I.E.L.D. Because of this, it shows off a rarely seen funny side of Rambeau, who is right at home leading a gang of marvelous misfits. In the sprawling world of comic books, determining the most powerful Marvel superhero is a complicated task. Thor and Hulk are pretty popular choices, but some would argue villainous candidates like Galactus and Apocalypse are actually stronger. While she might not be the first name that comes to mind, Monica Rambeau is a contender as well. Her energy-based powers don't just make her a formidable force to be reckoned with, they might also make her immortal. In 2019's Avengers, No Road Home, Monica, now Spectrum, has a deeply philosophical discussion with Vision about the inevitability of human death. Rambeau is quick to point out that her body is actually a vessel of pure energy, so technically she cannot die. Does this make her less human? She and Vision come to agree that only they can determine the answer for themselves. What is clear, however, is the extent of Monica's abilities. She could live for decades, even centuries, protected from battle, old age, and general wear and tear. Even the most powerful superheroes have a weakness. Superman's notorious Achilles' heel is kryptonite, Luke Cage's impenetrable skin is susceptible to adamantium, and Wolverine's healing abilities are rendered ineffective when the injury is dealt with by the Muramasa blade. It's a long story. Although she might be vastly powerful, even Monica Rambeau winds up on death's doorstep every once in a while. In 1988's Avengers number 293 and number 294, Namor, the Submariner's wife, Marina Smallwood, transforms into a gigantic sea monster, leaving the Avengers to hunt her down. When they find her, Monica turns herself into a bolt of electricity in order to stop the deadly creature. Unfortunately, when she contacts the water, she accidentally conducts herself across the entire ocean. When her fellow Avengers find her, she is shrunken and near lifeless. Although she lives through the traumatic experience, she temporarily loses her powers, leaving her no option but to quit the superhero game and resign from the Avengers. Monica eventually regains her abilities, but not until after a long time spent being haunted by the painful way she nearly lost her life. Water and electricity certainly don't mix, especially when you're an energy-based superhero. Superheroes hooking up with other superheroes is as much a part of the genre as the origin story. Luke Cage loves Jessica Jones, Kitty Pryde has a history with Colossus, and Rogue and Gambit have actually managed to get married. Likewise, Monica Rambeau has shared intimate moments with a couple of supermen throughout the years. 2009's limited series Marvel Divas features Monica teaming up with fellow gal pals Hellcat, Firestar, and Black Cat. Here, it is revealed that while helping clean up after Hurricane Katrina, Monica and Jericho Drum, the sorcerer better known as Brother Voodoo, made a connection and acted on it. However, the one-time Sorcerer Supreme isn't Monica's only love interest. During 2013's run of Mighty Avengers, Monica, now using the name Spectrum, gets injured fighting Proxima Midnight and has to be healed by fellow Avenger Adam Brashear, aka Blue Marvel. This leads to a very strong relationship and one heck of a power couple. Blue Marvel's powers include cosmic intelligence, antimatter manipulation, and energy control. Although she makes her debut as a kid in Captain Marvel, Monica Rambeau's part in the colossal MCU is set to extend far beyond her childhood. Her next appearance will come in the upcoming Disney Plus series, WandaVision, with Mad Men's Tiana Paris cast as a grown-up version of the character.
Wanda, what's up?
Who are you? I don't know.
If you're confused by how Monica's inclusion will make sense in this series, you're not alone. Heck, everything about WandaVision is still shrouded in mystery, including the very premise of how Vision, who was presumably destroyed by Thanos in Avengers Infinity War, comes back from the dead. Marvel's promos for the show only introduced more questions, showcasing various scenes of Paul Bettany's Vision and Elizabeth Olsen's Scarlet Witch from seemingly different time periods. Throw Monica Rambeau into the mix, and you've got one serious head-scratcher.
This is gonna be a gas!
Leaked set photos of Paris as Rambeau wearing a blue sword jacket seemingly confirm that she will be working for or with the Space-Based Task Force, which has yet to make an appearance in the MCU. Fans will just have to wait and see how it all comes together when WandaVision hits Disney+.
The Incredible Hulk is one of Marvel's oldest and most recognizable icons. Created by comics legends Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, and first appearing in 1962's Incredible Hulk #1. The Green Goliath spawned hundreds of comics, 2 live-action movies, a popular live-action TV show, and multiple animated series, films, and video games. And most importantly, big foam hands that make smashy sounds when you hit things with them.
I've got the power of the Hulk in my hands, and I like it!
With so much Hulk over so much media, it's almost impossible for even the most hardcore fans to keep up with all the stories. Here's the untold truth of the Incredible Hulk. Banner smash! One of the strangest and most hilarious periods of the Hulk's history was the reign of Savage Banner, which turned the most well-known Banner-Hulk relationship on its head. Toward the end of 1995's The Incredible Hulk #425, longtime Hulk writer Peter David changed things up. After enjoying a few years in the Hulk's body while retaining the intelligence of Bruce Banner, the Hulk transformed back into Banner, but gained the simple mentality of the Hulk. For the first time in the history of the character, anger became the Hulk's greatest weakness. Previously, even after turning into the Hulk, the hero's strength would continue to increase as he got angry. Now he struggled to stay calm during fights with the likes of Thor and Man-Thing so that he wouldn't get angry and transform into the utterly helpless Bruce Banner. Bob Banner. There are a lot of differences between the Incredible Hulk comic and the 70s live-action TV show. One of the first obvious differences is that the Hulk's more human half in the show is named David Banner rather than Bruce Banner.
David? David? David, come on!
Kenneth Johnson, who developed the Incredible Hulk show, explained that he changed the name because he didn't like the comic book tradition of using alliteration when naming characters.
And I was looking to break away from that tradition so that people wouldn't be thinking comic book in any way when they looked at the show.
Regardless of the reason, Johnson isn't the first person guilty of changing Bruce Banner's first name. That honor goes to Stan Lee. Lee was writing a lot of comics in the early and mid-60s and used alliterative names for his characters, in part to help him remember all the names. Unfortunately, in the case of the Hulk, this led him to mistakenly referring to Bruce Banner as Bob Banner. His solution, announced a few issues later in Fantastic Four #28, was that the real full name of the Hulk's more human alter ego was Dr. Robert Bruce Banner. Hilariously, that wasn't Lee's only name slip-up, which is why 1963's The Amazing Spider-Man featured a few pages of some guy named Peter Palmer. Red Hulk's real origin. In 2008, Hulk was relaunched with a creative team of Jeff Loeb and Ed McGuinness. The pair introduced the world to the Red Hulk, a malevolent, intelligent, and vicious red-skinned version of the Hulk, who seemed like he might be even more powerful than the original. It took a couple of years, but in Hulk #23, it was revealed that the Red Hulk was General Thaddeus Thunderbolt Ross, the same army general who'd hounded the original Hulk for years. Believe it or not, Loeb wasn't the first writer to think of a Red Hulk. Kenneth Johnson, who developed the 70s Incredible Hulk show, thought a Red Hulk made more sense since it's the color most people associate with anger. But Stan Lee was adamant that the Green Hulk was too iconic an image to be changed. So they painted Lou Ferrigno green, and Red Hulk went back into hiding for another 30 years. Many voices. While Lou Ferrigno voiced the Hulk for the 90s Incredible Hulk cartoon and in most Marvel Studios films featuring the Hulk, he wasn't the Hulk's voice in the Incredible Hulk TV show, the one where he, actually played the Hulk. The source of the 70s Incredible Hulk's grunts and growls was Ted Cassidy, best known as Lurch from the Addams Family. Cassidy also read the narration that told the story of David Banner in the beginning of each episode.
Dr. David Banner, physician, scientist, searching for a way to tap into the hidden strengths that all humans have.
After Cassidy passed away in 1979, Charles Napier replaced him as the voice of the Incredible Hulk. Psychic senses. You might think the Hulk's abilities are limited to the physical, but there's more to the big green guy than just pounding on stuff. Throughout his comics, the Hulk has shown some strange, almost psychic abilities. During one of the Hulk's first encounters with Doctor Strange in Marvel Feature Number 1, Strange learned that the Hulk could somehow see and interact with Strange's astral form. Peter David later made use of this ability, pounding the Hulk with ghosts both literal and metaphorical during his run on Incredible Hulk. On top of that, the Hulk has always instinctively known how to return to the Gamma Bomb site where he was created. More than 100 issues later, this was explained as being a kind of psychic energy summons from the Maestro, a future version of the Hulk who was defeated by being teleported back in time to the Gamma Bomb Blast. But this doesn't explain the Hulk's other geographic instincts, such as Incredible Hulk number 33, when the Hulk is able to leap from the coast of Wakanda and instinctively know how to angle his jump in order to land on a tiny atoll in the middle of the ocean. Warhorse. Beyond his ongoing rivalry with Wolverine, the Hulk doesn't have a lot of connections with the X-Men, so it would likely surprise even Wolverine to know that the Hulk was briefly the herald of one of their most powerful adversaries, Apocalypse. In Incredible Hulk number 456, Apocalypse captured the Hulk and transformed him into one of his 4 horsemen, making the Hulk the first non-mutant character to be a Horseman of Apocalypse. Apocalypse's transformation included cybernetic implants in the Hulk's brain, a big sword, and a retractable metal whip. The Hulk's added power allowed him to easily dispatch with the twin threats of Juggernaut and the Absorbing Man, either of which would be a match for the Hulk on his own. X-Men Destruction. World War Hulk X-Men wasn't the first clash between the Hulk and Professor X's students, but it was definitely one of the most savage. The Green Giant fought one of the largest gatherings of X-Men imaginable, and he took them down. All of them. While Professor X was a member of the Illuminati, a secret cabal of superheroes who were the Hulk's targets during World War Hulk, the Hulk traveled to Xavier's school to confront him. Rather than allow their mentor to be taken prisoner, the X-Men fought back. At first it was only a small squad, but soon all the active X-Men were facing the vengeful Hulk, including X-Factor and the Juggernaut. The Hulk eventually relented, but not before breaking both of Colossus's arms and liquefying Wolverine's brain by punching him in the head over and over again.
Hell. I don't suppose you got any interest in talking this out.
Trolled by Hawkeye. Even though Hawkeye shot Bruce Banner in 2016's Civil War II, nobody would consider Hawkeye and the Hulk to be rivals. Still, if you look at the narrative history, they do have a kind of weird relationship with each other. Specifically, Hawkeye's always gone out of his way to be a jerk to the Hulk.
"'Cause it just made me angry."
Really? Because from where I'm standing, you look more beat up than angry.
After Hawkeye rage quit the Avengers, he came upon the Hulk battling the villain Zax in Incredible Hulk number 166. Hawkeye was so determined to show his former teammates what he was made of that he followed and pestered the Hulk all the way into the pages of Defenders number 7. He annoyed the Hulk so much that the Defenders initially attacked Hawkeye, thinking he was a villain threatening the Hulk. Then, when Hawkeye took over the Thunderbolts, he needed a way to boost team morale. Once again, he targeted the Hulk, just because he thought it would help their image. 4 years later, in Avengers number 74, Hawkeye decided the best way to get his spot back in the Avengers was to draw blood from one of its founding members. After Banner proved that he could calm down She-Hulk by talking to her, Hawkeye went ahead and shot Banner anyway to force him to Hulk out. Even though he had a good reason to shoot Banner in Civil War II, one thing is undeniable: Hawkeye's a real jerk.
"What do you want?"
What I want? I wanted pickles.
For more than a decade, the Tesseract has been a crucial force behind the actions and motivations of many of the Marvel Cinematic Universe's major players. Let's take a look at some of the lesser-known or little-remembered facts about the origins, powers, and timeline of the story thread which has bound the Marvel movies together. The Tesseract traces its origins as far back as time itself. In the MCU, the Big Bang brought about 6 primal elemental singularities: time, reality, soul, mind, power, and space.
1 down. 5 to go.
The essence of the universe itself was forged by mysterious cosmic beings into the Infinity Stones. The Space Stone came into the possession of several ancient civilizations, including the Celestials. At some point, its power was harnessed by a crystalline cube casing, the Tesseract. The origin of the cube is yet to be revealed, but its purpose was to tame the raw power of the Space Stone, making it more easily controllable. At some point, Odin, the ruler of Asgard, came into possession of the Tesseract and housed it in his own vault, as the crown jewel of his collection of some of the most powerful cosmic weapons and artifacts in the universe. Odin captured and stored in his heavily guarded vault any weapon or relic he thought could possibly bring about end times, also known as Ragnarok, and the Tesseract definitely fit that bill. In the first Avenger, Captain America fights the Hydra super soldier Red Skull aboard the airship Valkyrie during the film's climactic battle. As the Valkyrie speeds towards New York City armed with nuclear warheads, the Red Skull attempts to turn the tables on Cap by barehanding the Tesseract, but it doesn't exactly go well for him. A portal opens, blasting Red Skull out of the ship and carrying him off to parts unknown, while the Tesseract burns through the hull of the Valkyrie and descends into the depths of the ocean. Poor Steve Rogers isn't far behind, as the entire airship plunges into the icy water, where Captain America would remain frozen for the next 70 years.
Is there anything you can tell us about the Tesseract that we ought to know now?
You should have left it in the ocean.
It was nearly a decade before Red Skull appeared in another MCU movie. In his Infinity War cameo, the character is portrayed by Ross Marquand of The Walking Dead fame, replacing the first Avengers' Hugo Weaving. During the film, it's revealed that the Space Stone transported Red Skull to Vormir and somehow imprisoned him there. The Red Skull explains that his quest to control an Infinity Stone led it to reject him. He's now intrinsically linked to the Soul Stone as its guardian, but is never able to possess it. Sometime after Cap's fateful battle with the Red Skull, a deep-sea expedition led by Howard Stark uncovered the Tesseract in the cold waters of the Arctic Ocean, while searching for the body of Steve Rogers. The brilliant inventor had been instrumental in creating the scientific process that transformed Rogers from a scrawny weakling into a super soldier. While in possession of the Tesseract, Stark researched and studied its nature. The Tesseract's official first on-screen appearance comes in a stinger following 2011's Thor, but the MCU's first Tesseract reference is actually in Iron Man 2, during a scene in which Howard's son Tony is flipping through his father's notebook. The audience is able to catch a glimpse of a drawing of the Tesseract. Project Pegasus was formed in the 1980s as a joint operation between the United States Air Force and NASA, once the Tesseract came into possession of the US government. The project had been mentioned in other MCU films, but Captain Marvel was the first to shed more light on the top-secret undertaking. Marvel, a Kree scientist posing as human Dr. Wendy Lawson on Earth, is able to obtain access to the Tesseract and attempts to harness its power to produce a light-speed engine. When a test fighter flown by Carol Danvers and Lawson is shot down by Kree Star Force, Danvers destroys a powerful engine and in the process absorbs the cosmic power of the Space Stone. In Captain Marvel, Carol Danvers gains full control of her powers and memories in 1995, 6 years after her crash and subsequent abduction by the Kree. She's then able to thwart her pursuers and uncover the Tesseract in the hidden space station in Earth's near orbit. Once recovered, the Tesseract is kept safe by Marvel's beloved pet cat, Goose. Of course, Goose is actually a cat-shaped Flurkin, who stores the artifact in a pocket dimension in her stomach. Flurkins just so happen to resemble earthly felines in many ways, except for the many toothy tentacles they can release from their mouth. The tentacles enable the deceptively deadly Flurkin to devour large prey or objects to teleport or store in stomach-lining pocket dimensions. Later, Goose hawks up the Tesseract onto Nick Fury's desk, and Project Pegasus is revived to further study the object. It is soon relocated to a shield facility in the Mojave Desert to unlock its full capabilities. The Tesseract has appeared in at least 10 Marvel Cinematic Universe films. That's the same number as Iron Man, and one more than everybody's favorite Boy Scout, Captain America. Following the wild success of Joss Whedon's The Avengers, Marvel began to plot its storytelling much more carefully than it had before. With this re-collaboration, Marvel decided to make the Infinity Stones the central story elements of Phases 1 through 3. As a result, the Tesseract was retconned to contain the Space Stone. This pivot towards the Infinity Stones as the binding agent of the MCU will go down in Hollywood history as one of the greatest production moves of all time. And with a storyline more than 10 years in the making finally coming to a close with Endgame, it may indeed prove to be the end of an era.
With the stellar success of the Iron Man film franchise, it's easy to forget that the Golden Avenger wasn't always the major player in the Marvel Universe that he is now. The character's never exactly been a C-lister, but until Robert Downey Jr. infused the role with his irresistible humor and charisma, you couldn't exactly call him an A-lister either. Because so much of the superhero's popularity is based on the films, it's easy to forget how much the source material differs from what you've seen on the big screen. So as a little reminder, here's the untold truth of Iron Man. A different setting. The opening scene of 2008's Iron Man is set in Afghanistan, where Tony Stark is showcasing his weapons technology. But most Americans probably didn't even know the name Afghanistan in 1963. Instead, Tony Stark's origin in Tales of Suspense number 39 was set in a more recognizable locale to readers of that time, Vietnam. According to Stan Lee, his goals for the story of Tony Stark made Vietnam a fitting setting. Lee knew exactly who the Marvel readership was, and he wanted to create a character that challenged both himself and his readers.
I'm gonna come up with a character who represents everything everybody hates, and I'm gonna shove it down their throats.
A boy and his dog. If you only know Iron Man from the movies, you may be surprised to learn that, for the majority of his existence, Stark kept his superheroic identity a secret. To the rest of the world, Iron Man was actually Tony Stark's bodyguard, a nameless Good Samaritan keeping the super-rich Stark safe. Iron Man didn't reveal his true identity until 2002's Iron Man number 400, when he donned his armor in public without any attempt to hide. Despite what you might think, it wasn't because of a villain's blackmail or anything. He just did it to save a dog. In the story, Stark notices a dog about to get hit by a bank robber's car and leaps into the fray at the cost of his secret identity. Now that's a lucky pooch.
Truth is, I am Iron Man.
You're fired. For a CEO and billionaire, Tony Stark isn't great at keeping jobs. In 2004's Iron Man number 78, Tony Stark was confirmed as the United States Secretary of Defense. His appointment was short-lived, however. As part of the Avengers Disassembled event, which featured the Scarlet Witch using her powers to destroy the team, Stark found himself magically drunk at the podium of the UN. The drunk Stark became quickly enraged and threatened a visiting politician. Even for politics, threatening visiting dignitaries with laser blasts was just a step too far, and he soon lost the cabinet position. Seems fair. But that wouldn't be his last high-profile appointment. In 2007, at the end of Civil War number 7, Stark was named Director of S.H.I.E.L.D. Unfortunately, he would lose that position by 2009 following Secret Invasion. Making matters worse, he got replaced by Norman Osborn, the Green Goblin. How embarrassing. How would you feel about getting replaced by this guy?
You know how much I sacrificed?
Yeesh. Fighting Hawkeye. Iron Man is a founding member of the Avengers, acts as their main source of finances, and as the supplier of all the stuff they tend to break. He also has a knack for bringing in other long-serving Avengers, like the arching Avenger Hawkeye. Clint Barton first found his way into the Marvel Universe in 1964's Tales of Suspense number 57. Enamored by the seductive Black Widow, herself a villain at the time, Hawkeye fought Iron Man to help her steal Stark's technology. A year later, in Avengers number 16, Hawkeye became a hero as part of the new roster of Avengers, along with Captain America and 2 other former villains, Quicksilver, and the Scarlet Witch. But just because Hawkeye was on the side of the Angels doesn't mean that he wouldn't fight Iron Man again. Hawkeye joined the ranks of another super team, the Defenders, right before 1973's Avengers Defenders War broke out. When the two teams squared off against each other, it was Hawkeye and Iron Man who battled in 1973's Defenders number 9.
This can't seem to miss.
Well, first time for everything.
Made you look.
A true Hulkbuster. Tony Stark and Bruce Banner might be science bros in the MCU, but the two have gone head-to-head more times than most friends. Iron Man has even managed to get the upper hand on a couple occasions. Iron Man's first and most memorable victory over the Hulk occurred in 1980's Iron Man number 132. In the issue, Iron Man put 100% of his armor's energy into a single punch, and with it he was able to KO the Green Goliath. Stark rendered the Hulk unconscious again in 2009's Mighty Avengers number 22 by blasting the Hulk with an exploding rocket booster. Ironically, as successful as the Hulkbuster suit was in Avengers Age of Ultron, Iron Man has never been able to defeat the Hulk while wearing the Hulkbuster suit in the comics. Every Iron Man Hulk fight involving the Hulkbuster armor has ended in a cancelled fight, or with the Hulk having busted the Buster.
I'm sorry.
The Thorbuster armor. You hear a lot about Tony Stark's Hulkbuster armor, but the Hulk isn't the only fellow Avenger that Iron Man developed a specific armor to counter. In Marvel's 2003 three-part mini-event, Standoff, Dr. Doom manipulated international events to set Iron Man, Thor, and Captain America against each other. Not knowing how else he could even stand a chance, Stark created his Thorbuster suit. Powered by an Asgardian crystal that Thor had previously given Stark as a gift, the Thorbuster rig looked like a marriage between Tony's classic red and gold suit and the Destroyer's armor. But ultimately, it wasn't enough. Thor destroyed the suit's reactor and Tony ejected from the armor. The only thing that seems to get busted when Tony pulls out a blank Buster suit in the comics seems to be the suit itself.
Get you comfy. You happy now?
There's never been another superhero movie as epic as Avengers Infinity War, so it's time to look into everything that went into crafting this blockbuster, from the sheer scale of the star-studded production to the improvised line or two. And stay tuned to find out which one of your favourite Marvel heroes survived the snap off screen. The Road to War. According to writers Christopher Marcus and Stephen McFeely, work on the Infinity War script started around January 2016. The story went through several iterations before arriving at what we saw, including versions written well before Thor Ragnarok and Black Panther were completed. That means a lot of changes had to be made to Infinity War, from small omissions to major structural shifts. Howard the Duck originally made a brief reappearance. Thor bantered a little more with the Guardians of the Galaxy. Extra backstory for the Black Order was included. And we even almost saw a destructive sequence on Xandar in which Thanos claims the Power Stone. But perhaps most intriguing of these changes involved Steve Rogers, whose role in the final cut was already pretty limited. Marcus and McFeely noted on Infinity War's commentary that in one version of the film, Cap didn't show up until the moment he saves Vision from Corvus Glaive in Wakanda, well into the final act.
And then after we read the draft, we did conclude we were all insane.
An epic production. Infinity War's story spans multiple planets and several continents on Earth, features dozens of speaking roles, and a range of massive set pieces which takes us from Edinburgh to Wakanda to Titan. It stands to reason that the production would be nothing short of massive too, and the numbers don't disappoint. Consider that many of the crew who worked on site had to be paid, fed, and even housed, and you'll get a good idea of how big this film really was. According to co-director Joe Russo, in the featurette Beyond the Battle Wakanda, over 6,000 people worked on the film at one point or another, all collaborating to create over 3,000 shots. Of those shots, 2,900 required some form of visual effects in post-production, which meant that a portion of the Infinity War effects team had to add something to just about every second of the film. Influences. Obviously, the comics themselves had a major influence on the plot of Infinity War, but they weren't alone. Directors Joe and Anthony Russo are, of course, huge fans of cinema, and a number of different films are referenced throughout Infinity War. On the film's commentary track, the moment in which Ebony Maw is burned while attempting to steal the Time Stone is a nod to Steven Spielberg's Raiders of the Lost Ark. A later scene in which Maw tortures Strange with needles is a reference to Marathon Man, while during interviews around the film's release, the Russos also highlighted a number of crime films as influences on Infinity War's heist-like elements, including Out of Sight and 2 Days in the Valley. Room for improvisation. As massive as it is, Infinity War required incredible amounts of planning and structuring in order to properly execute the script on screen. Despite that, however, the filmmakers still found room for a little improvisation along the way.
For the record, this was my plan. It was a nice contribution by Mr. Pratt.
In Beyond the Battle, Wakanda, the filmmakers note that the Black Panther cast were performing the Wakandan war chants off-camera as a way to warm themselves up for the action. The Russos heard the chants and decided to incorporate them into the film. Not all of the new additions came from the cast, though. On the commentary track, the filmmakers noted that Rocket, referring to the Outriders as space dogs, came from one viewer who called the creatures that name during a focus group discussion after an early test screening. They thought it was funny and added it to Bradley Cooper's dialogue for his Rocket recording sessions. The living and the dead. Infinity War ends with one of the most devastating gut punches in cinematic history, a montage spanning 2 planets showing us the deaths of numerous Marvel favourites, including Spider-Man, Star-Lord, Scarlet Witch, Black Panther, and eventually even Nick Fury.
Oh no. Mother.
It feels like a huge loss, but this is only a tiny portion of the devastation Thanos inflicted with his snap. Remember, we're talking about half of all life in the universe here, which means half of anyone you've ever seen, loved or hated in an MCU film or series. Naturally, the filmmakers also made sure to keep track of which characters survived and which disintegrated off screen. On the survived side, you've got Howard the Duck, Spider-Man's Aunt May, and Shuri and Nakia from Wakanda. On the snapped side, there's the Incredible Hulk co-star Betty Ross, the Asgardian Lady Sif, and, as we later learned, thanks to Ant-Man and the Wasp, Hank Pym, and Hope and Janet Van Dyne. Of course, it is a safe bet that none of them will be gone for too long.
Avengers Infinity War features more super characters than you can shake a cosmically powered stick at. Most of them you know, and many of them have had their own movies already. Even the Guardians of the Galaxy crew is pretty familiar at this point, but some of the supporting characters remain a little obscure. For instance, what's the deal with Nebula, the bald, blue-skinned cyborg played by Karen Gillan? How is her comics incarnation different from her character in the MCU? Let's explore. Thanos' granddaughter? When Nebula first appeared in Avengers number 257, Thanos wasn't even around. He'd been turned to stone years earlier, and although he wasn't technically dead, he was just as out of the picture. One of the first actions Nebula took in those comics was to claim Thanos' former headquarters, the Sanctuary 2, for her own. When Star Fox, Thanos' brother, claimed it as his familial right, Nebula made the claim that would come to define her. The space station was rightfully hers, because Thanos was her grandfather. Old look. In her early appearances, Nebula looked very different from the bald cyborg she would eventually become. She was a fully organic humanoid alien with gauntlets that enabled her to fire destructive beams from her wrists. She had long, bluish-black hair that rose up in big curls on the sides in one of those hairstyles that's only possible in comics. Nebula belongs to a race called the Lufamoids. There are only a few of them left in the galaxy because Galactus ate the planet of Lufam, and only those Lufamoids who were off-planet survived. Other Lufamoids, like Zor, a villain who first appeared in Nova #1, were desperate to find a new homeworld for their people. Nebula never seemed interested in that. Being a space pirate and the leader of a fleet of mercenaries seemed to be her truest calling. No love from Grandpa. Whether Nebula was being honest about her relation to Thanos was never particularly relevant, as long as he wasn't actually around. Being a pirate and mercenary gave her plenty to do in the universe-hopping Marvel comics of the 1980s. Of course, as all classic villains eventually will, Thanos returned to life, resurrected by Death herself. In Silver Surfer number 38, he met the woman who claimed to be his granddaughter. He was not impressed and claimed never to have fathered children. It was probably meant to be the truth at the time, but became a lie in light of later stories, because comics are very complicated. Declaring Nebula's lies unforgivable, Thanos set her on fire with beams from his eyes. He meant to kill her, but crew members on the Sanctuary 2 saved her life, in a manner of speaking. When Thanos rediscovered Nebula after their first meeting, she had been burned beyond recognition, profoundly brain damaged, and about to expire for real. By this time, Thanos had assembled the Infinity Gems into the Infinity Gauntlet, giving himself vast and godlike powers. He used those powers to stop Nebula from croaking, without actually healing her. She existed as a shambling, nearly mindless, charred zombie of a creature. Thanos' downfall. A confrontation with a cosmic being known as Eternity led to Thanos leaving his body unattended while his consciousness dealt with larger cosmic matters. This gave Nebula, who had been repeatedly described as nearly mindless, the opportunity to grab the Infinity Gauntlet off his hand and claim its power for herself, immediately restoring her body and mind in the process. She didn't keep the gauntlet for long, but she enabled the defeat of Thanos and was restored from her zombie-like state in the process. Bald is beautiful. After the events of the Infinity Gauntlet, Nebula's physical form was restored, but her brain was still damaged. Her longtime first mate, Gyatar, freed her from imprisonment and took her to a rogue space surgeon who promised to restore her faculties. When the fully restored Nebula was finally unveiled in Silver Surfer number 72, she'd become a bald cyborg who should look very familiar to Marvel Cinematic Universe fans. Finally back to her mental and physical peak, and even beyond it, thanks to her cybernetic implants, Nebula returned to the life of a space pirate. Amazing Graces. In Annihilation, Ronin, one of the miniseries that was part of Marvel's longer 2006 Annihilation event, Nebula was reintroduced as a member of a team of interstellar women warriors known as the Graces. The leader of the Graces turned out to be a woman with an even stronger connection to Thanos than Nebula herself ever had, Gamora. Whereas Nebula only ever claimed to be the granddaughter of Thanos, a claim never proven, Gamora was actually raised by him. When Nicole Perlman and James Gunn were writing Guardians of the Galaxy for the screen and figuring out how to translate all the complex mythology around Thanos to the cinematic universe, a story emerged that was simpler and more powerful than anything Nebula and Gamora had dealt with in the comics. A story about sisters. MCU Update. The Nebula of the Guardians of the Galaxy movies is, like Gamora, an adopted daughter of Thanos. Unlike the fully organic Gamora, Nebula has been enhanced with extremely visible cybernetics, leaving her a mix of woman and machine who suffers doubts about her own selfhood. Her self-doubt, combined with her close relationship with Gamora, enables Nebula to turn against Thanos and become a sympathetic character and a grudging ally to the heroes. She refuses to join the Guardians of the Galaxy, but by the end of their second movie, she's no longer the group's enemy. In fact, her new stated mission is to destroy Thanos herself.
I will help them by killing Thanos.
Setting up her appearances in Avengers Infinity War and its as-yet untitled sequel.
Just because Peter Parker's Aunt May is getting on a bit doesn't mean she's boring. In fact, there's much more to May than just a mean batch of wheat cakes. From her humble beginnings to her big screen debut and everything in between, here's the untold story of Marvel's most iconic golden oldie. Officially, May and Ben Parker made their canonical debut alongside Spider-Man in Amazing Fantasy number 15. But Spider-Man's origin story wasn't the first time that the characters had graced the pages of a Marvel comic. A couple of months before Spider-Man's big entrance, Stan Lee and Steve Ditko published a short story called Goodbye to Linda Brown in Strange Tales number 97, which featured early versions of both of Peter's relatives. Goodbye to Linda Brown is only a few pages long and doesn't leave much room for character development. But both Ben and May show glimmers of their future selves. For one, they look very similar to their Amazing Fantasy counterparts, especially May. For some reason, the colorist decided to give Ben a gray mustache, although Ditko clearly didn't pencil one in. In addition, both characters spend most of their time fretting over a teenager with secret superpowers, which is pretty much all Aunt May did for the first 50 issues or so of The Amazing Spider-Man. Luckily, things did get a little more interesting after that. Most fans probably saw Aunt May in the flesh for the first time in Sam Raimi's 2002 Spider-Man movie, in which Peter Parker's doddering aunt was played by Emmy-winning actress Rosemary Harris. But Harris wasn't actually the first person to bring May to life in a live-action project. That honor goes to Jeff Donnell, and so we're clear, Jean Marie Donnell went by her nickname Jeff, so that explains that. Anyway, she portrayed Aunt May in a 90-minute TV movie that served as the backdoor pilot for the 1977 Spider-Man television series. Donnell only played Aunt May in the Spider-Man pilot. For May's later appearances, the role was assumed by a number of different actresses, including reoccurring Dennis the Menace star Irene Tedrow. And of course, many actresses tackled the role of Aunt May in the world of animation before Harris immortalized her on the big screen. June Foray voiced May in Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends, in which Spidey and Company operated out of May's Queens-based abode. But you probably know Foray better as the original voices of both Rocky the Flying Squirrel and his arch-nemesis Natasha Futal. In terms of early Spider-Man stories, you won't find much that's more iconic than The Amazing Spider-Man number 33. This comic, titled The Final Chapter, isn't actually co-creator Steve Ditko's final pass at Spider-Man, but it does feel like an end of an era, and it puts Aunt May front and center of the story. As the issue opens, Aunt May lies on a hospital bed, dying from a transfusion of Peter Parker's radioactive blood. The only cure is an isotope known as ISO-36, which is contained in an underwater lab controlled by Spider-Man's arch-nemesis, Dr. Octopus. The two fight and destroy the lab, and as it fills with water, Spider-Man is pinned underneath multiple tons of fallen steel, with no hope of escape. The following 4 pages are arguably Ditko's finest work in any Spider-Man comic. At least, that's what Stan Lee thinks. Lee later said, "It was one of my all-time favorite stories. It was such a thrill, even to me, and I was the writer of the story. When I saw that, I almost shouted in triumph. Steve did a wonderful job." And who does Peter have to thank for his big moment? Well, Ditko, of course, but also Aunt May. As the water rises, Spider-Man thinks about his beloved aunt and how he's failed her in the past, namely by letting an anonymous robber get away, leaving him free to kill her husband, Ben. Using May's strength and resilience as motivation, Peter lifts the steel beams above his head and escapes. He delivers the isotope to the hospital in the nick of time and, with May cured, puts the specter of Uncle Ben's death behind him once and for all. The scene is so iconic that it plays out on the big screen too, in Spider-Man Homecoming. The Amazing Spider-Man number 121, in which the Green Goblin kills Peter Parker's girlfriend Gwen Stacy, is arguably one of the most important and notorious superhero comics ever published, but it almost played out very, very differently. Originally, Gwen Stacy was going to make it to the end of the issue alive and well, while Aunt May was to meet her demise at the Goblin's hands instead. That revelation comes from none other than longtime Spider-Man artist John Romita Sr., who co-plotted the issue with writer Jerry Conway. While talking to CBR, Romita confessed that he, and not Conway or artist Gil Kane, was Gwen Stacy's real murderer. The original plan was to sacrifice Aunt May to the Green Goblin, but Romita pushed back on the idea, claiming that it would actually make The Amazing Spider-Man less dramatic. Romita explained, "It'll lose one of Peter Parker's hang-ups. He won't have to worry about Aunt May anymore. He won't be treated like a child anymore. If we want to make any kind of stir in the monthly line, we have to kill somebody important." And so, Romita explained, the victim had to be one of the story's leading female figures. From there, Gwen Stacy became the obvious choice. At the time, Mary Jane was what Romita called an airhead comedy character, but Gwen Stacy was the love of Peter Parker's life. In order to wring the maximum amount of emotional turmoil out of the story, Gwen had to go. And the rest, of course, is history. Aunt May's abilities aren't limited to simply fretting about the well-being of superheroes, though. In fact, she's also a superhero herself. Sort of. In What If number 23, a backup feature called What If Aunt May, instead of her nephew Peter, had been bitten by that radioactive spider, tells the story of, well, it's kind of obvious, isn't it? In Amazing Fantasy number 15, Peter attends a scientific demonstration where he crosses paths with the fateful radioactive spider. In What If number 23, he leaves his bagged lunch at home, and Aunt May rushes to the Science Institute to deliver it. While she's there, the spider bites May on the hand, and her spider powers kick in on the walk home. May quickly sews herself a costume and creates a unique version of Spider-Man's web fluid out of some over-yeasted dough. Before long, she's taken to the streets as Spider-Ma'am, juggling her crime-fighting career with her familial responsibilities. And while What If stories aren't canonical, writer Christos Gage and artist Dave Williams made Spider-Man a reality in Spider-Man Team-Up number 3, part of Dan Slott and Olivier Coipel's dimension-hopping epic Spider-Verse. In the comic, a team of Spider-Men, including the Peter Parker we know and love, travel to Earth 3123 to rescue Spider-Man from Karn, an interdimensional hunter with a mad hatred for everything spider-related. The team is successful, but the battle leads to a dramatic development in Spider-Man's story. She finally reveals her secret identity to her husband and nephew, whose lives are changed forever. The list of people who have stopped Galactus, Marvel Comics' gargantuan devourer of worlds, is pretty short. The Fantastic Four have done it, of course. So have Thanos, the Silver Surfer, and the Beyonder. And Aunt May. Wait, what? This tale took place in Marvel Team-Up number 137, which was part of Marvel's Assistant Editors Month, an event during which some of Marvel's top creators were given free rein to tell the wildest and silliest stories they could imagine. In the comic, Spider-Man and the Fantastic Four head off to San Diego to thwart an unnamed disaster, leaving Reed Richards and Sue Storm's superpowered son Franklin in Aunt May's care. Unfortunately, just after the real heroes leave town, Galactus arrives in search of a new herald, and he's got his sights set on Franklin. One ill-aimed energy blast later, and Aunt May is transformed into the Golden Oldie, a glowing superheroine infused with the power cosmic.
I believe there's a hero in all of us that keeps us honest, gives us strength.
Thanks to Galactus, all of Aunt May's health problems, her arthritis, her vitamin deficiencies, her bingo addiction are gone. But there's a catch. Galactus is hungry, and it's up to his herald to keep him fed. At Franklin's prompting, May feeds Galactus a Twinkie. He loves it and demands more. Using her newfound powers, May scours first Earth, then the entire galaxy for more of the spongy, cream-filled snack cakes. On her travels, she meets an alien that looks suspiciously like the Pillsbury Doughboy, who just happens to make planets that resemble Hostess products. At May's suggestion, Galactus takes the alien on as his new herald and frees May from her responsibilities. When she returns home, Franklin absorbs all of May's cosmic powers, and everything goes back to normal. Right before writer Michael Carlin reveals that the whole adventure was just a bad dream. Or was it? Peter Parker will always be the main man in May Parker's life, but with such a busy day-to-day life, May's nephew doesn't always have time for his beleaguered aunt. Thankfully, despite her age, May is incredibly popular with the fellas, and has accumulated quite a collection of dudes to keep her company while Peter's away. There was Ben Parker, of course, who met his tragic demise in Amazing Fantasy number 15. But before Ben and May got hitched, she almost married a criminal named Johnny Jerome, who tried to win her heart with money and who returned to plague her in the Spectacular Spider-Man Annual number 4. In The Amazing Spider-Man number 54, Dr. Octopus rents May's spare room and wins her over with his charms. And in The Amazing Spider-Man number 131, he actually tries to marry her in order to steal her inheritance, although Hammerhead and Spider-Man interrupt the wedding before it becomes official.
Cute place. Real homey.
Oh, great, it's Liv.
Throughout the 80s, May dated Nathan Lubensky, a reformed gambling addict who asked May to marry him before he relapsed, fell afoul of the Vulture, and died in Amazing Spider-Man number 336. In the early 90s, she enjoyed a brief fling with the Fantastic Four's longtime mailman, Willie Lumpkin. After Peter Parker and Aunt May moved to Stark Tower in the build-up to Civil War, May and Tony Stark's butler, Jarvis, shared a mutual attraction. Finally, May dated and married J. Jonah Jameson's father, John Jameson Sr., and stayed with him until he died of a rare hereditary disease in The Amazing Spider-Man Volume 4, number 19. Aunt May actress Rosemary Harris was 75 in 2002 when Sam Raimi's Spider-Man hit theaters. When she appeared as May in The Amazing Spider-Man, Sally Field was 66. By contrast, Marissa Tomei, who plays May in the modern MCU, was only 50 when she first starred as Peter Parker's favorite aunt. That's significantly younger than May is usually portrayed. In Civil War, Tony Stark even jokes about it.
Who else knows? Anybody?
Nobody.
Not even your unusually attractive aunt?
But don't blame Tomei. While appearing on The Late Show with Stephen Colbert, Tomei revealed that she actually petitioned Marvel to make May into a senior citizen, just like in the comics, but the studio declined.
I actually made a case to go with to age me up, but no, they didn't do it.
Besides, as Civil War co-writer Stephen McFeely has explained, a younger Aunt May makes perfect sense, given that Tom Holland's Peter Parker is still in high school. McFeely told the Los Angeles Times that's partly why his aunt isn't 80 years old. If she's the sister of his dead mother, why does she have to be 2 generations ahead? In other words, the MCU's Aunt May isn't too young at all. In the comics, she's actually way too old.
An intriguing character from Marvel Comics catalog will be getting his very first solo movie vehicle in 2021, Shang-Chi, Master of Kung Fu. Who is Shang-Chi and how did he come to be the Master of Kung Fu, and what is his place within the world of Marvel Comics? We're here to break down the details for you. You may be aware that in the early 1970s, everybody was kung fu fighting, or at least they wanted to be. This was largely thanks to Bruce Lee, who had been exposed to American audiences via the television series The Green Hornet and with starring roles in films including Game of Death and the posthumously released Enter the Dragon, which kicked open the door for future superstars like Jackie Chan. The TV series Kung Fu, which starred actor David Carradine, is said to have originally been developed for Bruce Lee. Marvel hoped to adapt the series to cash in on the martial arts craze, but the House of Ideas was unable to obtain the rights.
As quickly as you can, snatch the pebble from my hand.
So then Marvel publisher Stan Lee turned to creators Steve Englehart and Jim Starlin to come up with an original kung fu-based property. The character they created would go on to become a Marvel mainstay. In the late 80s, long before Marvel came to dominate the box office, Stan Lee attempted to get a Shang-Chi movie off the ground starring Brandon Lee, Bruce's son. It never materialized. Not everyone was convinced that Master of Kung Fu would be an instant hit, so Marvel introduced the character in a dead-end book with the clunky title of Special Marvel Edition, which had up to that point published 14 issues of reprints of older Marvel stories. Much like Spider-Man, who first appeared in Amazing Fantasy number 15, Shang-Chi debuted in the pages of Special Marvel Edition number 15, published in December 1973. The public quickly took notice. It only took 2 issues for the book's former title to be dropped. It was renamed Hands of Shang-Chi, Master of Kung Fu for the remainder of its run, which lasted until 1983. Shang-Chi enjoyed a respectable level of popularity throughout the 70s, making guest appearances in several of Marvel's flagship books and interacting with some of its most high-profile characters. Despite this success, it was, as they say, a different time, and some elements of the character's backstory were more than a little questionable. Chief among these problems was Shang-Chi's lineage. In his very first appearance, he was presented as the son of the evil Fu Manchu, an overtly racist supervillain who had appeared in pulp novels and movies throughout the 20th century. The character was among the most popular of the so-called Yellow Peril villains, which spawned a number of devious, heartless Asian evildoers such as Flash Gordon, archvillain Ming the Merciless, and the Batman villain Ra's al Ghul. Marvel obtained the rights from Fu Manchu's creator, British novelist Sax Rohmer, and while their characterization was a touch more dignified, many Asian readers nevertheless found the character to represent a demonization of their culture. In his original origin, Shang-Chi was raised by his father to be the ultimate assassin, but quickly came to reject Fu Manchu's evil ways. Over the years, the two would clash repeatedly. In later years, the identity of the hero's father would be retconned to actually be the immortal sorcerer Zhang Zu, who for decades had simply been using Fu Manchu as an alias. But this was largely due to the rights reverting back to Rohmer's estate rather than a desire to rehab the character. Like many of Marvel's heroes, Shang-Chi technically doesn't have any superpowers. He was molded by his father into the ultimate weapon, a master practitioner of all forms of Chinese martial arts. Not only does this mean that he's an absurdly skilled fighter, it also means that he has a level of control over his body that few characters in the Marvel Universe can match. He's able to regulate a number of supposedly involuntary bodily functions. For example, he can reduce the function of his nerves to the extent that he's practically impervious to pain, and he can even slow down the rate at which he bleeds. He also has a master's knowledge of pressure points, enabling him to take down opponents with a single strike, and is known to unleash a bone-rattling flying kick, which packs an unbelievable amount of force behind it. Like Captain America, he's said to represent the peak of human strength, power, and agility. He does, however, boast one skill specific to only the most skilled of martial artists, one that raises his abilities to a level slightly beyond those of fellow non-powered heroes. Shang-Chi has the ability to focus his chi, the spiritual energy or life force inherent to all living things. In real-world martial arts, this practice is used mainly in meditation and as a way of controlling one's fear and anger. In the Marvel Universe, the ability can be honed into a weapon, and Shang-Chi uses it to augment his skills to devastating effect. He can temporarily boost his strength and endurance beyond even peak human levels, dodge or deflect bullets, and control his body's reaction to poison or drugs. Because of these abilities and his utter mastery of an array of deadly fighting styles, Shang-Chi is often considered to be the greatest unarmed combatant in the entire Marvel Universe. He was deemed by no less an authority than Black Panther to be an even more formidable fighter than the superpowered Iron Fist. His mastery over his chi has even received a technological boost. At times, he uses a special pair of nunchucks designed by Tony Stark, which can accumulate and disperse Shang-Chi's spiritual energy, unleashing deadly concussive blasts. Shang-Chi's interactions with other Marvel heroes has been frequent, but one of his wilder team-ups was with an unlikely band of New York-based heroes. It started with an investigation into the bizarre slaughter of an entire faction of Brooklyn Mafia members. Daredevil discovered it was the work of Ulik, a rock troll hailing from Asgard's underworld, who had come to Earth in search of a mystical horn. Daredevil enlisted the aid of Shang-Chi, Black Widow, a cloakless dagger, and the Punisher to form the Marvel Knights and deal with Ulik and his minions. Afterwards, the rest of the group became determined to bring the Punisher, whose methods they found to be unsavory, to justice. They were joined in this dangerous endeavor by Moon Knight, but the revamped group's efforts were interrupted by Cloak, who was in the psychological clutches of the demon Nightmare, and was on a misguided rampage to consume all evildoers. After consuming the Punisher, Daredevil, Black Widow, and Moon Knight, Cloak was halted by Doctor Strange, whom Dagger had brought in to assist before things got truly out of hand. By the end of the series, the Punisher was still punishing away. Shang-Chi has occasionally been called upon to train other heroes in hand-to-hand combat, including your friendly neighborhood wall crawler. During the Revenge of the Spider Slayer story arc, Spider-Man realized that the villain, Alistair Smythe, had found a way to imbue his Spider Slayer robots with a version of his spider sense. He created a device to disrupt the ability, but was forced to set it off manually, deactivating his own spider sense in the process. This caused some difficulty in the subsequent Spider Island event, during which thousands of heroes, villains, and ordinary citizens alike developed spider powers. On the recommendation of Madame Web, Spidey went to Shang-Chi for training. He created a completely new martial arts style intended to complement Spider-Man's powers, which he called the Way of the Spider. Spider-Man became an even more dangerous fighter than he already was, using his newfound martial arts prowess to take down opponents as powerful and skilled as Spider-Woman and even Shang-Chi himself. Shang-Chi has at times been imparted with superhuman abilities. During the aforementioned Spider Island event, he was one of the many temporarily granted the same powers as Spider-Man, a scary notion if ever there was one. He used these powers to help dispatch the threat of the spider-powered supervillains running roughshod over New York City. In another incident, Shang-Chi was dispatched with other Avengers to the fictional island of Madripoor to deal with an ancient dragon which had been awakened from its slumber underneath the island. Using Pym particles, Shang-Chi enlarged himself to match the dragon's Godzilla-like stature and promptly defeated it in combat. In a more recent incident, Shang-Chi volunteered to investigate the city of Kobe, Japan after it was struck with the evolution-speeding Origin Bomb by the godlike entity known as Ex Nihilo. While others had been absorbed by the Genesis matter, which was a byproduct of the bombing, Shang-Chi was able to commune with it and in the process gained the ability to produce an unknown number of duplicates of himself, each one with the original's memories and abilities. It's unknown whether he still possesses this power. Back in 2006, when Marvel first announced its intentions to start Marvel Studios and produce a slate of films featuring some of its lesser-known characters, virtually no one was thinking that the endeavor would result in the single highest-grossing film franchise of all time.
Avengers!
Assemble.
The rights to Marvel's most famous properties, namely Spider-Man and the X-Men, were held by Sony and Fox respectively, both of which had created successful film franchises. Marvel seemed to be coming late to the party, with a stable of characters that included, in the order they were announced, Captain America, the Avengers, Nick Fury, Black Panther, Ant-Man, Cloak and Dagger, Doctor Strange, Hawkeye, Power Pack, and Shang-Chi. Marvel Studios would, of course, go on to elevate many of these properties to household name status, although some took considerably longer to develop than others. Ant-Man took a full 9 years to reach the big screen, and the preteen Power Pack have yet to get its time in the spotlight. But finally, well over a decade after the fact, Shang-Chi stands poised to join the MCU, thanks in part to another solo vehicle which became one of Marvel's biggest success stories and one of the biggest films of 2018. Black Panther astonished audiences, crafted mainly by African-American filmmakers and featuring a hero who is the king of the technologically advanced African nation of Wakanda.
This never gets old.
The film proved that big-budget blockbusters created from a specific cultural viewpoint can resonate strongly with general audiences, and it even outgrossed the juggernaut that was Avengers: Infinity War at the domestic box office. Taking a cue from this success, Marvel appears to have gone all in on diversity, and it's likely the studio's hope that Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings can strike a similar chord in pop culture at large. To this end, the production has been loaded up with talented people of Asian descent on both sides of the camera. Japanese Japanese-Irish-American Destin Daniel Cretton will direct from a screenplay by Chinese-American scribe Dave Callahan, who is contributing to Warner Brothers' upcoming Wonder Woman 1984, as well as Sony Pictures Animation's as-yet untitled sequel to Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. Chinese-Canadian actor Simu Liu has landed the title role, and the suddenly ubiquitous rapper-turned-actor Awkwafina will appear among the supporting cast. Legendary Chinese actor Tony Leung will co-star as the Mandarin, an iconic villain who many fans feel was previously given extremely short shrift. The title of Shang-Chi's solo vehicle quickly got the attention of Marvel fans, alluding as it does to a mysterious terrorist organization that has lurked in the shadows of the MCU since its inception. The Ten Rings are the group responsible for Tony Stark's kidnapping in Iron Man. They've been alluded to in both of that film's sequels as well as Ant-Man. They're led by none other than the real Mandarin, who famously wears a ring on every finger in the comics. This is not the phony Trevor Slattery or his handler Aldrich Killian, both of whom falsely laid claim to the Mandarin name.
Where's the Mandarin? Where is it?
Whoa, he's here. He's here, but he's not here. He's here, but he's not here.
In Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings, this group will finally step out of the shadows and truly make their presence felt. The Ten Rings are dedicated to nothing less than the destabilization of the entire planet, sowing the kind of chaos which will lead to the collapse of world governments and create a power vacuum. They've butted heads with Iron Man, Black Widow, and Nick Fury, but they'll soon face the Master of Kung Fu, who never met a challenge that he couldn't kick the absolute crap out of.
Check out one of our newest videos right here. Plus, even more Looper videos about your favorite things are coming soon. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the bell so you don't miss a single one.